Morena Koto, good morning everybody. Welcome to this morning's Kaipara District Council District Plan Review briefing. For this morning, we have with us a fabulous cast and crew who are going to be leading us through an extraordinary amount of great detailed work here. But before we get on with that, I'm going to open today's briefing with a karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapu pounamu te moana. Hei hoa rahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia, tātou katoa. And I have to say that out the window here, the kaipara is indeed smooth as greenstone today. It's a very beautiful morning here. For this morning, for our district plan review briefing, we have Deputy Mayor Anna Curnow. We have Councillor Jonathan Larson. We have Councillor Mark Vincent, and we have apologies from Councillor Peter Wethy, Councillor David Wills, Councillor Karen Joyce Paki, apologies for lateness from Councillor Erin Wilson Collins, and also apologies from Councillor Victoria Delavaris Woodcock. So today there's only 4 of us who are here at present, and the other 5 are not present. So, but as this is not a meeting, but is a briefing of the council, this event can proceed. If it were a full meeting, we would not be able to proceed. So there you go. At this point, we're going to move on. I'm going to hand over to Michael Day, who's our policy lead for everything here to do with our wonderful district plan review. And Michael, over to you. Thank you, with an update on where we're at. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good morning, elected members. So today we have our 6th district plan, our 6th draft district plan briefing, a process which commenced in September last year. This is the final briefing where the staff team will be presenting individual chapters for feedback. As I say, it's the last bits of a jigsaw puzzle prior to the whole puzzle coming together next month. Personally, I'm actually really proud of the work all our team has done to date, but that work is not finished yet. And as you mentioned, Your Worship, there is a lot of material to get through today. My team will take all the papers as read. We will focus our presentation on key areas for direction from your team as well, in the effort to maximise our time and get through the material as efficiently as we can. Catherine, next slide, please. So, as you mentioned, Your Worship, there is a lot to get through today. Key topics which we will be discussing are the Tangata Whenua chapter that will be led by Virginia Smith, the Maori Purpose Zone chapter, which will be led by Macarena Dalton from Barkers and Associates with support from Kyle Middleton. The 3 infrastructure chapters there, very topical as well. That will be led by Caroline Ratt. And then the designations work, which is led by Paul Vanders in our team. Next slide, please, Catherine. Look, I won't go over this slide here. We all know what the aims of the day are right now. Let's just keep moving. Thanks, Catherine. Next slide again. So yes, as I touched on, this is the last briefing session where we are providing you with individual chapters for feedback. The plan is that next month we'll then be presenting the full draft district plan to you in its entirety, and we'll workshop that through with you, Your Worship, and your team. I'll then be taking a paper to the May Council meeting for approval to commence 2 months of public engagement on the draft plan from early June. Very exciting. Any questions to date before we carry on?
None. Carry on.
Carry on. Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. Next slide, please, Catherine. Right. So the intention always has been for our draft plan to include a chapter on ecosystems and Indigenous biodiversity. No one disputes that our district contains substantial areas of land with high ecological value, which supports a unique range of plants and animals. For some time, the central government has been promulgating a national policy statement on Indigenous biodiversity, which aims to provide a standardized criteria and process for identifying significant ecological areas, also known as SNAs. That was meant to be finalised at the end of last year, and then it was meant to be finalised in early 2022, and again, it has been delayed again. Since it has been delayed, and there's actually some uncertainty as to when it will land, and the actual requirements for councils inside that NPS, the staff team don't feel comfortable at this stage putting our draft district plan out with a chapter on Indigenous ecosystems and biodiversity. So I'm suggesting that we actually release our draft district plan without this chapter. I do need to note that it is not uncommon for a draft plan to be released without one or more topics or chapters. My suggestion is that when the national policy statement is actually landed by central government, that we undertake standalone community engagement later this year on this topic, and then slip it in to the proposed district plan in due course.
Thank you. Michael, if I can just stop you there. We've
Yes,
got
Your Worship.
a question here from Councillor Curnow. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just a question around what's the plan around letting the community know, one, that it's not in there, two, that we plan to put something in at a later stage and we'll consult on it, but also that there is a gap, so it's not like that this is the plan and then later we go, oh, and by the way, this has to be in it, but here is the plan, here is the gap. These are the issues that we are waiting to understand. Is there a plan around that, just so the community are not surprised later on?
Certainly. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So two answers there. One, our team will be bringing our engagement plan to you next month, and that's going to outline all the ways which the team propose to engage with the community, starting probably in May with the articles in the Kaipara Kororo and articles like that, which we can start to socialise this as well. When we have our draft plan out, we'll literally have a holding page saying this work is still to be developed, and also when I put the May council meeting paper in front of you, I'll have a whole section of this as well, explaining that as well. So there'll be multiple means of communicating this with our communities.
That's great, thank you. That's answered my question beautifully.
Thank you. But just from me here, Michael, but that will be saying that this has been delayed not because of Kaipara District Council, but actually because we're waiting for the national policy statement.
That's correct, Your Worship.
So it's not our fault, if you like, that it's not there. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any further questions on this before we proceed further in the presentation?
I'm not seeing any further questions, Michael, and I think that's straightforward. I think it's a good approach to a difficult situation. And
it's
also,
an emotive topic, Your Worship, and look, there's a risk if we don't do this properly, don't do it justice, that it's going to backfire on us. So look, I think we just do it properly, do a proper process with this, and it's going to be the best outcome we can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm fully supportive of that. And Yeah, in any case, it may well have been that this would have note the tense there, would have possibly attracted 20 or 30% of the heat and noise and excitement around our district plan review, as
If
it has
not,
done in other parts of the region, such as in the far north.
I would say possibly 50%, Your Worship, if not
50.
more.
Oh, there you go.
If not more, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Well, I was
Yep.
being conservative, but there you go. Because I know that there are so many exciting other parts of this wonderful
Absolutely.
document that are going to animate so many wonderful Kaipara people here. Anyway, so all right. Thanks, Michael. We'll proceed on, please, with
Thank you, Your Worship.
your presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that's the end of my brief introduction update. Next will be talking through the tangata whenua process chapter with you. That's led by Virginia Smith. Are you here, Virginia?
Yes, I am. Hang on, I'll just put my video on.
Thank you.
Morena koutou.
Morena.
So this morning I'll be taking you through the proposed tangata whenua process chapter. Can we go to the next slide, please, Catherine? Thank you. So so work is still ongoing on this. This version is still being reviewed by Te Reo Hau, but they endorse it in principle with the understanding that Council anticipates that some changes may be made before the final draft is presented in its entirety. The plan is presented to you in its entirety. This is giving you a brief overview of what the differences are that are between the operative and the proposed draft. So what I've done in this chapter is, and with tangata whenua as well, is the draft is aimed at assisting the plan user by supporting their understanding of different tangata whenua resource management concepts, actively encouraging early engagement and inclusion of mātauranga in the district and kaitaki methodology. It gives, well, I hope it gives a good example of how Treaty of Waitangi principles are applied and provide certainty for plan users around which iwi authorities they should be consulting with, because that was the inclusion of the map and the links to the iwi authority websites plus their applicable legislation, and it's, of course, it's been aligned to the national planning standards. So the chapters have been generalised. You'll notice that there's, in the current one, we've got very specific Te Reo Hau, Te Roroa perspectives. What we've done here is that we've generalised that to enable inclusion of anticipated iwi settlements, new ones that are coming in. So Ngāpu, who still haven't settled, Ngāti Wai still haven't settled. So, and Te Reo Hau and Te Roroa, we're very conscious of that. So that's why we've sort of generalised it. We've generalised the settlement history. We've generalised the values, as you'll see down in the document, and that's because each iwi authority, because their rohis are different, they actually have different priorities. And the chapter would have just probably exploded too if we had to put all of those individual priorities into the chapter itself. Yeah, so it does direct users to go to their environmental iwi hapa environmental management plans to find out what those specific values are to that iwi in that area, and I think that we've done a really good job with tangata whenua because it recognises the rangatira of each iwi authority, and it shows that they are not prepared to encroach on each other's whenua. So I think it's quite good. Michael.
Just noting that this chapter is a process chapter. It doesn't have any objectives, policies, or rules in this chapter. So those objectives, policies, and rules which relate to tangata whenua, mana whenua, are in other chapters of the plan, such as the multi-purpose zone and the sites and areas of significance as well. So that's some contextual context there as well. Any questions or feedback on this chapter for Virginia at this time?
Are there any questions from elected members? I have a question, but I'm happy to go last. Oh, welcome, Councillor Wilson-Collins. Nice to see you here. Are there any questions here? Elected members. I have a question for Virginia. Okay. And it's a contextual question, and it's how we are keeping this current. Can we go to Councillor Curnow first? Councillor Curnow, you do your question, then we'll come back to me. Thank you.
Yeah, just thank you, Virginia. You mentioned that that you've run this past Te Uri Ahau and they're happy with it. What about other iwi hapu partners? How are they in this process? Where are they?
So we've been working pretty much exclusively with Te Uri Ahau and Te Roroa on this. The reason being COVID stopped us from having those kanohi to kanohi conversations with our other iwi authorities. Ngāti Manuhiri, they're another settlement. So we've got 4 settled iwi authorities, claim settlement, which is Te Uri Ahau, Ngāti Manuhiri down in Mangawhai, Te Kauirawa Maki. Now they also too come up just into that corner section of our district in Mangawhai as well. In Te Roroa, did I say Te Roroa? So we've got Te Uri Ahau, Te Roroa, Ngāti Manuhiri and Te Kauirawa Maki. So unfortunately we haven't been able to consult with, as we had planned. We did have a plan around consultation, however, because of the COVID restrictions and also to their availability, because they're dealing with the COVID things within their own iwis, it just sort of made it impossible. So we have heavily relied on Te Roroa and Te Uri Ahau. And you'll see that there's a little section just before the values there, and it reflects council support for the decision that Te Roroa and Te Uri Ahau did make in regards to ensuring that those other iwi, there was room for the other iwi authorities to come in underneath this plan as well. And that's why they kept it very general, very broad, so that not one iwi authority was speaking louder than the next. Does that make sense, Councillor? Yes, and of course we have our MEA and our MOU with Te Roroa and Te Uri Ahau.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did pre-circulate a couple of questions, one of which might belong in this chapter, where I said, is there a space where we could exemplify the difference between the bureaucratic council view that the Kaipara Harbour is not part of our district, with the Maori worldview, which sees all such things related, and how what we do on the land has an effect on the water? Is there some way of introducing that as an illustration of the difference, perhaps?
Yes, and I did take so what I've done is I've put together an edit into the chapter underneath that, in that introduction part, for unfortunately it isn't in here because you guys already had the briefing stuff. But I did think about what you said in your comment, Councillor Vincent, and I've taken it to consideration. So I've done a quick edit down the bottom, in the bottom 2 paragraphs. I can read it to you if you like. No, I can send it to you. Okay. But yes, I have taken that into consideration and expressed how it all went, how our jurisdictions interrelate and connect. So it's our responsibility, council's responsibility, to regulate the land activities and land uses so that it doesn't have a harmful effect on the jurisdiction of NRC's role, which is in that Kaipara Harbour area. And it's also for Mangawhai and Rewhito Beach. That's our part of our responsibility in the whole resource management jigsaw puzzle. And so I've gone and reflected that using the connectivity of the Te Ao Māori worldview. thank you for that too. I just want to say thank you for that question and those comments, Councillor Vincent.
Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Virginia. I just want to double check, just with the questioning from Councillor Curnow with that consultation with the two iwi down on the Mangawhai side of our district. Am I correct that they would still have an opportunity through the broader consultation process to come back? And like, it's not like they've been cut out, is it?
No, not at all. So, and that's the beauty of us putting out this draft district plan. To be fair, that whole process there, it still allows for them to have a say and make changes to the draft before it's notified. So this is, I really commend the council on this approach. It does provide more opportunity for even Maori to you know, from an individual basis to feed in. So no, by no means is this, yeah, there's still heaps of opportunity for them to come in.
Perfect. Just wanted to double check. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got a question. I think it's come up before, and it's regarding the language that we're using here regarding tangata whenua, when all of the new government policy and new direction talks about mana whenua. Now, I'm very comfortable about the two different meanings of those very two distinctly different phrases, but I'm seeking clarification about where we're going to land here in a document that's talking about tangata whenua when the rest of the legislation's now no longer talks about tangata whenua. It's going to be talking to mana whenua. So and even a shift away from iwi towards mana whenua. So we can't presuppose any of that. And I guess I'm coming here from a place of the specific example of kāpehu marae, which is which I'm led to believe where the Ngāti Kahu have who are there have tangata whenua status but don't have mana whenua status. And I'm just trying to work out, we make sure no one's left behind. That's where I'm trying to get to here. I just want to make sure that we're making sure no one's excluded here, but I hope I'm making myself very clear in that.
Yes. Michael, I see you've come on. Do you want to answer this one?
It's a good point, Your Worship, and we do need to future-proof ourselves here. The national planning standards, which we're required to put our new plan into, actually refers to this chapter as the tangata whenua / mana whenua chapter. So I think we can, so we can actually call it both. And
we can call it both?
And that's the safest way, I think, to actually do this. Tangata whenua, mana whenua.
Look, look, if there's any direction here from me, that would be an enormous relief if we were to call it both, because that, if you like, will help to future-proof the work that we're doing here and the intention of what we're doing. Yeah. Thank you.
Through the Mayor, I just want to say too, and that was another, I think that's another beautiful thing about this chapter, why it's written so generally, because we did have at the forefront our non-affiliated marae, so that the generalization of the values and things like that, they are just really broad, and it allows iwi authorities to say, no, that's not our marae, but you have to go down and consult at this level. And because of the engagement things that we have in the chapter itself, and encouraging and supporting early engagement, things like this, it allows them to use those engagement techniques that we've put into the chapter down at that marae level. So yeah, so they were at our forefront as well, Mayor. I just want to let you know that.
Thank you. Kapai. Are there further questions regarding this chapter? I do have a question, because call me old-fashioned because I'm a farmer. Page 10 of the report with a map and the statutory iwi areas of interest through settlement claims. So that's all good, and that's clear. The Kaipara district boundary is, do you want to mark very clearly on the map the Kaipara district boundary for where the settlement and the iwi boundaries are differ, if you like? So we kind of say, well, for example, Te Parafo come across towards Dargaville, but they are mainly in, you know, Manga Te Pere, you know. Do you know what I mean? It's but we're just trying to say that it's not just linked to the district council boundaries, the rohe.
Okay, yes, I can definitely do that.
Thank you. And also for interest, and because in the description here, we mention our council engagement regarding Taharoa domain with Te Kuihi, but in this, and that's on page 13, but if you like, it appears to me that that's the only mention of Te Kuihi.
Te Kuihi.
At the top of page 13 regarding the Taharoa Domain Governance Board. So again, you kind of go, well, let's go to the map. Sorry, thinking in a simplistic sense. And where's Te Kuihi? Oh, so then you go, so if this is one source of truth that we're trying to get to in our simple and enabling district plan, we go, well, so where are they? Yeah. Because we may know as elected members around this table, but the reader may not necessarily do so. And so we're just wanting to make it as easy and one-stop source of information as simple as possible for our readers. Yeah.
Yes, I'll address that, your worship.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this or bits of suggested direction from elected members? No, all right. Look, thank you, Virginia. Ngā mihi. Look, it's wonderful work that you're doing here, and it's really, really significant for us and for the district plan review as a whole for what's ahead. So, thank you. Back to you.
Thank you.
I'm just going to pop on just to quickly introduce Macarena Dalton from Barkers, who's going to present our Māori Purpose Zone, and this is her first time presenting to elected members. And Macarena comes from a huge background, actually from Far North District Council before her role at Barkers, but she's done a lot of work for other councils across New Zealand looking at papakainga provisions and Māori Purpose Zones, so she's definitely the right lady for this job. So Macarena, I'll hand over to you.
Kia ora, Catherine. Tukuna te reo mihi ki te atua I hanga nei te tai ao te aorangi te ao nei. Rere te mihi ki te iwi wairua, ki a rātou te hunga mate, haere, haere, haere.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Ka whai ngā mihi ki a tātou te hunga ora. Tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. As Catherine said, I am Macarena Dalton. I am a senior planner at Barker and Associates, and based up here in Kirikiri, but work out of our Whangarei office as well. And so she gave a bit of my background. I previously worked at Far North District Council in the consents and planning team for about 7 years, and have been at Barker and Associates for a year. In my time working here, we've worked on a number of plan reviews and offered advice to different councils on Māori Purpose Zone and Māori planning generally. So kia ora, tēnā koutou. So this is our draft set, kia ora, our draft set of provisions for the Māori purpose zone for the proposed or the draft Kaipara District Plan. So just a bit of background and context for everybody, just to get ourselves in the room and to understand the purpose of the Māori purpose zone. So approximately 28% of the Kaipara population identifies as having Māori descent, so that's from the 2018 census. Approximately 3% of the district is classified or identified as Māori land under Te Ture Whenua Māori Act, which has been captured here in the sort of browny purpley colour on the right map, and that's currently what's been identified as a potential Māori purpose zone in the draft district plan. You can see that most of the zoning is concentrated in the northern and southern parts of the district on the west coast. And the average size lot from all of the parcels of land is 42 hectares, but a median size is probably the best indicator of for how land can be developed, and that's 4.5 hectares. Thanks, Catherine. So why do we need a Māori purpose zone? So before we get into the statutory context, I just want to go over some of the barriers for development on Māori land or whenua Māori that have been identified not just through district plan processes, but also through other sort of, I guess, investigations by the Crown and other councils as to why development on Māori land is difficult and hasn't developed at a rate similar to general land. So one of the barriers is just the nature of multiple ownership and succession challenges that sort of exist in the way Māori land is administered. There's also a lack of sustainable management structures. So that's the Māori Land Trust or the Ahu Whenua Trust that are established under the Māori Land Court. There's also a lack of financial pathways for developing Māori land. You all might be familiar with some of these, but you may know or may not know that the traditional lending pathways aren't available to whenua Māori, so you can't go to the bank generally to loan, to build a house or invest in your farm on whenua Māori. There's also, I don't want to call these barriers, but there's also legislative controls that are in place under Te Ture Whenua Māori. So just when you want to build a house, occupy the land, you need to go through another process, and that's to get either an occupation order or a license to occupy to actually be allowed to develop that land. And that, again, that can be quite difficult because it has to come back to whether there are any management structures in place on that land. And again, you'd have to go through those processes before you can go to the Māori Land Court. So there's just layer upon layer upon layer of sort of process and procedure that people have to go through just to start a building consent or a resource consent process. And finally, so we come back to the role of the district plan or the role of the council, and that comes back to the Building Act, Building Code and the district plan. So what we're seeing at the moment is 4 layers at least of barriers for development on whenua Māori, and we're sitting at, I guess, at the bottom or at the coalface, and we want to try and remove some of that layering as we see appropriate. Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so the statutory context of under the Resource Management Act. So I've just highlighted sections 5, 6, 7 and 8. So those are all under the purpose of the Resource Management Act and what councils or people exercising functions under the Resource Management Act. That's what everybody has to try and do or be mindful of. So I just want to highlight section 6. And so these are matters of national importance. So it recognises that we have to recognise and provide for the relationship of Maori and their culture and traditions with their ancestral lands, water, sites, wahitapu and other taonga. So that's the link here to the Resource Management Act, where we're looking at ancestral land. Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so you would have seen the draft provisions in the briefing paper that we put forward. So we've got, I guess, the 2 objectives here. So in these objectives, we're seeking maximum flexibility to use and develop ancestral Māori land, and for Māori to be able to exercise their role as kaitiaki over their whenua, incorporating mātauranga Māori and tikanga Māori, while still ensuring the health, safety and well-being of people and communities. We've also highlighted that tangata whenua are still enabled to use, develop and occupy ancestral Māori land when there are other values present at the site. So these are things, other matters of national importance, things like natural character of the coastal environment, natural hazards, sites of cultural significance to Māori, and so on. Thanks, Catherine. And the policies to give effect to those objectives. Again, it's about enablement. So we're creating a framework that is as enabling as we can, but while still managing the effects or adverse effects of development, either within the site, but also on the surrounding environment as well. Just want to highlight policy. Oh, sorry, Catherine. I just wanted to highlight.
Sorry, Macarena, I'll go back for you.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight policy 5, where it talks about the physical characteristics of land, servicing capacity, and also the consideration of tikanga Māori here. Because I think at the moment, the operative district plan has really enabling provisions for papakainga development in the Māori land or Māori purpose land and treaty settlement land zones. So there's already enabling provisions there for papakainga development and commercial and industrial activities. And what we're trying to do in this plan change is to, not restrict any further than what the plan already provides for, but maybe give a little bit more direction and certainty about what types of activities might happen here, but also linking it back to the characteristics of that land and the servicing capacity of it. So can it actually achieve on-site servicing when development is being undertaken? Thanks, Catherine. So we just got a summary really of the list of activities or the types of things that might be provided for in the Māori purpose zone. And so under the permitted, you've got a range of activities, and it sort of reflects the way that Māori land is generally used, but also reflects the different tikanga or cultural purposes that reflect the relationship that Māori have with the land. So we've got a range of activities provided for here, not just papakainga housing, but you've got educational facilities where there may be some sort of mixed type of development, such as kōhanga reo next to a marae, or kōhanga reo next to a papakainga development. But you've also got, your traditional agriculture, pastoral and horticultural activities provided as well. As I mentioned earlier, we still provide for commercial and industrial activities, just with a few limits, I suppose, placed on them to manage effects that might be associated with those. The restricted discretionary activities, so these are largely linked to those activities that are listed in the permitted. So there might be a siting and design control, for example, a setback or a coverage rule. And if you don't comply with that, it triggers the need for a resource consent. We've got large-scale commercial activities as a discretionary, and then we have heavy industrial activities as non-complying, so something we want to discourage happening in the Mardi purpose zone.
Kia ora, just before we're near the final slide, Macarena, the Councillor Curnow has a question to come in here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Macarena. Really useful overview. I just had one question around tourism activities, because I know a couple of our marae are interested in tourism activities, and certainly with the cycle trail, etc. There are opportunities that might present themselves now and in the future. Are tourism activities, but they're not specifically provided for, but are they covered under maybe education, visitor, commercial? I'm just wanting to make sure that we're not kind of making that difficult. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, they are provided for, so they would be covered probably in a range of activities. They could be covered, as you say, as an educational facility if there was some sort of educational component. I'm thinking something like, say there was a nursery on the site and there was maybe an educational component as part of that would be provided for under either educational facilities or commercial activities. I also want to highlight that we've included visitor accommodation as well, to provide for things like B&Bs, or if you have if you're near the cycle trail or the cycle trail that's been discussed, you can still establish, there are scale or limits on how big you can go, but it does provide for, you know, your B&B level of development.
Okay, cool. So you're comfortable that there is flexibility in there for that sort of activity?
Thank you, Councillor. I am comfortable, however, we can make it explicit through a permitted activity standard if we needed to. So that might be, and we would just develop a definition of what a tourism activity might be.
Yeah, that might be something for that comes out of the consultation on the draft, I suspect. Yeah, if it's needed. Others may not feel that it's needed the way I do. Yep, cool. Thank you.
Councillor Vincent, question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Morena Macarena, I'm not too sure if you saw the questions that I did pre-circulate. I've got an issue about the definition of Maori land. In your presentation, you've just said that you showed us a map of the district, and that approximately 3% of the district is relates to land subject to Te Ture Whenua Maori Act. Yet the definition goes further than that, doesn't it? To include general land owned by Maori. And I just want to know why.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, good distinction I think that you've picked up there. So we've got the in the briefing paper, we've got a definition for Māori land. And so I just want to make a quick distinction between Māori land and the Māori purpose zone. So in the Māori purpose zone, we have identified land that is Māori customary land, Māori freehold land, and other land that has been returned as part of treaty settlement at the moment. There are a couple of other categories of land that are included as well, which I can't remember off the top of my head, I'm sorry. But they're not Māori land, sorry, they're not general land owned by Māori. So when we look at the Māori purpose zone, it's a specific category of land that is definitely Māori land. When we talk about Māori land, there's a different set of provisions that are being discussed at the moment, or that are below the briefing paper, and that's under papakainga provisions in the rural zones. So this is something that might go into rural zones, and it provides for papakainga development on Māori land, general land owned by Māori. So that is a category of Māori land under Te Ture Whenua Māori. When you look at section 129 of Te Ture Whenua Māori Act, it lists the different categories of land, and it talks about what general land owned by Māori is. And so that's described under section 129(2)(c) as land other than Māori freehold land that has been alienated from the Crown for a subsisting estate in fee simple, which shall, while that estate is beneficially owned by a Māori or group of persons of whom a majority are Māori, have Crown status of general land owned by Māori. And so what this means, or what this provides for, is under Te Ture Whenua Māori, it can you can either change your land to be Māori freehold land, or you can put it into a one of these governance structures that help you administer that land. But what this category of land generally is when land was compulsorily transferred from Māori land to general land between the 50s and the 80s. So it was, it's like a compulsory transfer of land out of Māori land tenure. And that's recognised as being different than just general title.
So is that land, from what I get what you're saying, is that the it has a special history to it, that had that not, like it might have been Public Works Act or whatever process that changed the status of the land, had that not happened, it would have been communally owned Maori land, say. Yeah?
Yes, that's right.
So then, with its current status, is it capable of being alienated in the same way as other general title land?
Yes, it is.
So then, is there not the prospect that, is that going to show up on our zoning maps?
No. So that's the distinction between...
That's because that was my problem.
Yeah.
How you could have this bit of, trying to track a Maori person's purchases and sales around the district with the zoning pen.
If I can assist Makarena, excuse me, through you, Your Worship. Councillor Vincent, one of the things we're trying to do obviously is be as enabling as possible. And if Māori do want to revert back to Māori freehold title, which would happen in order to qualify for Māori purpose zone. So what we're saying is that we've captured all the land that's currently Māori freehold status, but there is the potential obviously for more with the land that Makarena's described that was converted to general title through the native land court process during the 50s to 80s. And so if they're actually still held in general status, we're trying to work with the owners to encourage them to come back to being Māori freehold land. But obviously that has its clawbacks in terms of the barriers that Makarena set out. So if they choose not to go back to Māori freehold status, it could be that they decide to hold it in a trust, like an ahu whenua trust, or a type of trust that means that the governance structures actually hold that land for the purpose of those landowners and for as long as the trust exists, if you like. So I guess what we're saying is that the multi-purpose zone is going to be for those landowners that really want to take advantage of the multi-purpose zone provisions, which are enabling. And so it could be that there are also properties that are still in a process of going through the Māori Land Court currently to become Māori freehold status, and we'd hope to capture those before we notify. But I think this is going to be a place where we're always going to have to try and catch up to get those additional land holdings as they change status if they want the benefit of the multi-purpose zone. So hopefully that just explains, I guess, what we're trying to do is provide an enabling zone for those landowners, not to exclude them, but certainly if they're still general status, our view is that they don't currently qualify unless they want to do something different. And what Makarena referred to in terms of the rural zone is that if they do set up a trust or do set up a mechanism to hold that land, then they should be able to benefit from the provisions that we provide in the plan to set it apart from other landowners that wouldn't have that structure in place. So yeah, hopefully that's clear, but certainly take on board your points around the issue. And it is a complicated one, isn't it, Makarena, in terms of the legalities. We actually did seek some legal advice around which land status we could apply our rules to, and it was clear that we can apply rules to general title status, but you'd want to have that assurances that it's actually not going to be sold off as freehold titles can be. So we just wanted to make sure we've put those protections in the plan for those landowners, if that makes sense.
So in other words, like a public kainga development on such land, which is then sold off.
That's exactly right. We don't want to encourage that. The key with Te Ture Whenua is that you don't alienate your land, and you'll hear a bit more from me this afternoon in terms of subdivision. We don't want land to be fully partitioned unless there's a good reason for that. So we just want to make sure that we're capturing it right, and we're consistent with what other councils are doing, if I'm correct, Makarena, in this space as well. We're not doing anything unusual.
Okay, perhaps then I realise, well, I certainly get the impression it's quite complicated and messy, but maybe we need to try and unpick that a bit in the district plan to explain that to people, because I certainly had got no impression of that. Maybe I'm just thick, but from reading the documents as presented.
Councillor Vincent, we will obviously have a Section 32 report that will accompany the zone, which Makarena will be working through. And I think this is certainly a key issue that we need to address across all Māori land status. So if we do something special for treaty settlement land, for example, in our plan, we need to explain that as well. So yes, it will be well explained. And like I said, we have got some advice around how to treat Māori land. So we have been looking into the complexities that come with it. So yes, there'll be good documentation that should explain our thinking when we get to that point.
Okay, thank you. I guess certainly it doesn't have my support, the idea of applying the zone rules to land that happens to be owned by Maori, unless there is the background to it as you have laid out in terms of the sort of compulsory change of status, which there's I think quite a bit of repair work to be done in that regard. Okay, thank you.
Kia ora, Makarena. I have a question and or for Catherine, and it's regarding our actual objectives that are proposed here. So MPZ 01 and 02 or 01. Oh, it's O for objective, sorry, isn't it? It's not 01. Objective 1 and objective 2. Look, I've got a really simple point. We have bits of Māori purpose zone land, to which there is no legal road access. Do we have a map of those parts of the Māori purpose zone land currently, to which there is no legal road access to the edge of that title? And
Yep.
my next question is, are we going to do anything about that? Because when we're talking here about enabling and being an enabling district plan and enabling use, development, and occupying ancestral Māori land, which is the wording here, what does that mean if we're the road controlling authority and we have jurisdiction over roads and there are parts where there's no road connecting that Māori purpose zone to the rest of the road network? It's a hard one.
I'll respond to that just briefly, Your Worship. So, and Kyle's available here with our maps as well if we need to go into that level of detail. But what I would say is unformed legal access is always an issue for Māori land, and I think you raise a really good point there. We haven't, looked site by site individually at how each of the titles would gain access, but bearing in mind there's lots of paper roads across the district as well, it could be that we need to find some solutions as the landowners do want to approach council for development. So I guess it kind of comes up when they are looking at sort of the specifics. Sometimes they might have road access on one site but not another, and it might be more easy to develop the other side than the road access side, whatever might be the case. But I think you raise a really good point, and it does tend to play out when we get to the specifics of the development that is coming forward. So certainly we want to try, and it is a really difficult one because, as you'll know, road access has all sorts of legal issues in terms of how do you get there, and there are mechanisms, through easements, right-of-way access, sometimes landowner agreements and things like that. So it really is something that we can promote all we want, but at the end of the day we need to be able to respond to help in any which way we can, and until we know what that situation is, it's a bit tricky. But certainly what we can do is have a look at which sites might have problems, and we'd at least be able to go into our section 32 report knowing the number of sites that might have access as an issue, which I think would be helpful for the public to understand, and for us certainly. And it isn't something we've looked at currently, so I think you raise a really good point there. And I'm just trying to remember what your second point was, Your Worship, around.
That was the only point. It was the only point. It was only on that. It was linked. That. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So hopefully that provides a bit of a response, but certainly we've got the maps. We can start there and look at, have they got road access? Have they got access to perhaps an unformed paper road? And if they have neither, then they'll be landlocked, which would mean that we would then need to look at those legal avenues in terms of easements or right of ways to get. And that's sometimes a tricky one because you're then dealing with the adjoining landowner. And I've seen some pretty horrific fights in my career in terms of getting access to Māori blocks, from landowners next door who don't want access through. So it is a bit of a challenge, unfortunately. But if we've got an idea of what that looks like and how problematic it might be, I think that's a good starting point. So
yes. So for example, if we say, right, well, 3% of the land is in the Kaipara district is Māori purpose zone land, say, and of that, 10% is landlocked. Then we're doing our job, if you like, and we can then go back to central government and say, Minister of Māori Development, help us here regarding getting the funding to make this enablement occur, because
it's a nationwide issue.
if we're being trying to be simple and enabling for ngā tangata katoa, this is part of it.
Yeah, no, it is a problem. It's a problem. I think there was a group that were trying to lobby central government to try and address this issue through like Te Puni Kokiri, because they are obviously the government agency that's trying to promote papakainga development as well, and landlocked titles are one of their issue as well. So with anything changes at that level, that would be really helpful for everybody in New Zealand, because it is a big issue.
Yes, and for us, it would be interesting to know what that is for Kaipara the scale of that issue for Kaipara.
Certainly. Yep. So we can look at
Thank
that.
you for this district plan. That'd be awesome. Councillor Kuno.
Just to tautoko what you've just said, Mayor, one of the earlier mana whenua forums that council held, that was one of the big issues that came out was landlocked Māori land and how can council assist with unlocking it. So yeah, it's a really important issue to to our district and to our Māori in particular. Yeah.
Kapai. I think that's clear. Catherine Macarena, back to you.
Your Worship, I think we were just at the point where we were just wanting some direction next as to Macarena's proposed provision. So the package she's put in front of elected members there, and whether there were any further sort of questions. Are we missing anything? Is there something that you'd like to see that we haven't thought about? So I think your previous point, Your Worship, around the legal access is a good take home. But certainly if there's anything else, we're here obviously to seek direction from you. If there's anything else that you'd like Macarena to include in that chapter and the set of provisions we've put there.
Okay, thank you. That was the key point from me. The rest of it's all very, very clear and helpful. Thank you. But elected members, over to you. Any further commentary or direction here? Nothing, which is a positive sign that the elected members are going, yes, this is headed in the right direction. Awesome. Notwithstanding the fact there are 5 not here. Sorry, four not here today. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd just like to just a couple of closing comments before I jump off, and just to your point, Your Worship, about the legal access, as Catherine said, that's a nationwide issue that's been it's multifaceted in terms of solutions, but something else that we can look at as part of the district plan is looking at non-statutory tools. So again, something we can investigate as part of the section 32. So non-statutory tools that can support the unlocking of Māori land. But it also might not relate to how we gain access there, but it might recognise the limitations of that land. So other councils, I've seen non-statutory tools such as rate relief that's applied to that land that has no legal access. So that's something that was done at the Far North District Council for a long time before the changes to the Local Government Rating Act last year. And I just wanted to mention that, like Virginia said, we are in consultation with mana whenua working on these provisions. They're currently reviewing them, and we should have feedback to incorporate into these provisions next week. Ngā mihi, thank you very much.
Kia ora. Nothing further on this, elected members? Okay. Yeah, ngā mihi, Macarena. Catherine, thank you for this item. We're going to move on now, and according to our schedule, we're due to be having a break at this point in our agenda, and it's due to be a 10-minute long break. So I'm just going to go to Michael Day very quickly. So Michael, if we break now, will you be able to have the next section running at 10:45, which is early?
Yes, Your Worship. Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, very good. Thank you. We'll do precisely that then. So we'll take a 10-minute break now, resuming at 10:45 a.m. For the next part of today's district plan briefing, review briefing, which is about infrastructure, being led by Carolyn Ratt from Ratt Resource Management, along with the team. Thank you. Seeing you at 10:45. Ka kite. Kia ora koutou. Nau mai, haere mai, welcome back. We're going to now make a start with the next section of our district plan review. Sorry, running out of breath here. Of our district plan review, and so we're going to hand over now to Michael Day, who's going to introduce Carolyn Ratt. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'd like to introduce Caroline Ratt. She has extensive experience with drafting a whole range of chapters for district plans across the country, including infrastructure and transport chapters. So look, we're in good hands here. I'll pass you over to Caroline, and she'll be talking us through infrastructure now and then transport a little bit later on in the piece. So over to you, Caroline.
Thanks, Michael. Morena koutou, councillors and Your Worship, thank you for having me today. As Michael said, my name is Carolyn Ratt. I'm a policy planner. I've been doing this for quite a few years now, but my area of expertise is really working with councils and central government in the plan making kind of stage of things, not only just the drafting, but carrying it right through to appeals as well, so everything in between. So as Michael said, my role with Kaipara is to draft primarily the infrastructure and transport chapters, but I'm also helping Michael, Catherine and the team integrate so that we get consistency across the chapters, which is particularly, it's necessary to be honest when you've got this big change to the national planning standards, which has completely turned the structure of our plan on its head. So the purpose of this one really is to give you an overview of the infrastructure. It is a draft, as you know, so it's just a starting point for the conversation with you, with our communities and with our network utility providers as well. And Catherine, if you just wouldn't mind going to the first one, please. So what is infrastructure? And I certainly don't expect you to be au fait with all the ins and outs of this. So this is the definition from the Resource Management Act, and it really sets out what infrastructure is. And it's things that you would expect. It's things like telecommunications, it's things like radio communications, electricity distribution is different from electricity transmission, although both are included, water supply for communities, reticulated, drainage, sewage systems, transport networks, and obviously you've got different layers of that, whether it be our local network or our state highways, rail, everything that you would pretty much expect in terms of infrastructure. Next one, please. So I think while it's important to recognise what is infrastructure, I think it's also important to recognise what isn't infrastructure. Now, to give you a little bit of background, in the Waikato, the independent hearings panel just released their decision on all of the chapters, including infrastructure. And so a lot of this, the thinking and the slides here have built on our experience, what came out of those hearings, what came out of the evidence, what came out of the decisions of the panel. But not only that, we've been watching what's been going on with all sorts of other places like Porirua, like Selwyn, the draft coming out of Nelson, Northland, Waitomo as well, and Tauranga as well. So those are kind of where I've drawn these things from. It's all those other district plans, and quite often the same people are turning up to each of the district plan hearings with the same issues. So one of the things that does come through very strongly, particularly from federated farmers, is what isn't infrastructure. And so what I've ring-fenced here is rural land uses are not infrastructure when they're on-farm services and do not have a public or group infrastructure purpose. Because one of the things that came out is, well, I've got water lines that go to my troughs. Is that infrastructure? Am I captured by this chapter? And no, the intention is not to capture that kind of infrastructure. But having said that, the definition of infrastructure is a little problematic in the Resource Management Act because it says, for example, a water supply distribution system, including a system for irrigation. But the intent of this chapter, and I've put it in the introduction, is it's not the type of on-farm infrastructure that's just for that farm. It's more at a wider level. It's things like reticulation of water. The rules in the liquid fuels or gas section only apply to facilities and structures operated by a network utility operator. Because the same question came up, what if I've got a diesel tank? What if I've got lines, you know, that go to my house with gas? So yes, the gas where it's a reticulated system, yes, but not for a diesel tank, for instance. And it is a little bit problematic because infrastructure provisions apply to both a network utility operator, such as your electricity distribution and your telecommunications companies, but it also does apply to landowners, such as if you were doing earthworks next to the national grid, which is our electricity transmission network. There are rules in there about water servicing for development, although they may well be more suited to go into the subdivision chapter, which Catherine will be talking about later this afternoon, and amateur radio as well popped in there, because that just seems to be a logical fit. Next chapter, next slide, please, Catherine. So obviously we've got some key drivers here. So your your regional policy statement has a very strong bent on regionally significant infrastructure, quite the emphasis on that. And some of the objectives and policies, what they seek to do is recognise and promote the benefits of regionally significant infrastructure. Through its use of natural and physical resources, regionally significant infrastructure can significantly enhance Northland's economic, cultural, environmental and social well-being. Seeks to manage the reverse sensitivity, for example, avoiding effects of sensitive development on regionally significant infrastructure. So to give you an example, you know, some people go, well, what is that? It seems like a bit of a catchphrase. So reverse sensitivity is where you might have, for instance, the national grid's always a good one. You wouldn't want to put sensitive land use right next to that for several reasons. One, for safety, for flashovers, but also because it does generate some buzzing, particularly you know, when there's high water content. And so you manage sensitive land uses around those regionally significant infrastructure. And the regional policy statement also recognises adverse effects. It recognises that regionally significant infrastructure is generally big stuff, and that there will be adverse effects, but we need to manage those. Next slide, please. So what is regionally significant infrastructure? Now that's captured in Appendix 3 of your regional policy statement, and it's things like electricity, both the national grid and the sub-transmission and electricity to essential public services, which are listed. It's electricity generation, which Jerome and his team will be covering in the next presentation. It's council water storage, trunk lines and treatment plants. It's council wastewater, trunk lines and treatment plants, and also key elements of the stormwater network, including treatment devices. Next slide, please. You'll notice that I haven't put roads in this one. That's because I'll cover that in the next presentation on transport. Regionally significant infrastructure also includes main pipelines for the distribution or transmission of natural or manufactured gas or petroleum, and key delivery points and storage facilities. Key facilities required for communication, including telecommunication, broadband, wireless networks and radio. Flood management / protection schemes managed by regional and or district councils, and it includes, although that's not covered by this particular chapter, other social and community facilities such as public hospitals. So they're covered by other chapters or other zones. Next slide, please. But the regional policy statement doesn't just focus on regionally significant infrastructure. It also does capture just general infrastructure. And you might say, well, that seemed the regionally significant infrastructure seemed to capture everything. What is left? But things like local roads aren't captured. You'll find that, excuse me, electricity distribution that isn't at the transmission network is not captured as either. But by and large, a lot of the stuff is included in the regionally significant. But in terms of the direction for just infrastructure, which obviously covers both, it seeks to optimize the use of existing infrastructure to ensure new infrastructure is flexible, adaptable, and resilient, and meets the reasonably foreseeable needs of the community. strategically enable infrastructure to lead or support regional economic development and community well-being, integration and coordination of infrastructure with development, which everybody will be familiar with, and sustainable built environments that provide a range of transport choices. So that becomes particularly relevant for the next presentation on the transport chapter. Next slide, please, Catherine. So in addition to our a regional policy statement, we also have some national planning tools which guide what we do, give us the guidance, if you like, what we do with infrastructure. So as you'll be aware, in this district plan, we need to transition to the national planning standards, and where this sits is it's in part 2, which is the district-wide matters. And then there's a section which is energy, infrastructure and transport. And then within that, there's going to be 3 chapters. There's an infrastructure chapter, a transport chapter, and Jerome's team's been looking at the electricity generation chapter as well. In addition to that, we've got the National Policy Statement on Electricity Transmission 2008. And so that's all about the national grid, or largely the assets that are owned by Transpower. We have the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, which certainly gives us guidance on infrastructure, obviously in the coastal environment, which does in some places extend quite a long way inland. And in terms of the national environmental standards, now these are, if you think about these, they're pretty much a substitution for a district plan rule. So rather than having district plans doing something slightly different in each district, these 2 have a standard set of rules. So that's the National Environmental Standard for Electricity Transmission Activities. And so that, again, that's the national grid. That's what they do, how they manage, how they evolve, how they upgrade their existing national grid structures and assets. And then you've got the National Environmental Standards for Telecommunications Facilities 2016. Now, what's worth noting with that one is that that has been updated since our district plan became operative. So there are quite a few changes that are necessary as a result of that transition from, I think the first version was 2008 and this one's 2016. And as you'll be aware too, we've got the New Zealand Electrical Code of Practice for electrical safe distances. So that controls a couple of things. It controls trees around electricity lines, but also buildings as well. Next slide, please, Catherine. So that was the boring stuff. That was really just, we aren't creating this chapter in a bubble. We are given pretty strong guidance by your regional planning tools, but also your national. So the general approach of this chapter, as I've said, is in the national planning standards, is to bring all the infrastructure provisions into a single chapter. And as I've said, the transport and the electricity generation are separate chapters, but generally to bring everything into one place. And the approach that I've taken is generally enabling, except for 2 things. So where infrastructure, new infrastructure I should say, is proposed to be located in an overlay, such as a site or area of significance to Mardi, an outstanding natural landscape, it could be a significant natural area. It's basically those section 6 matters of the RMA. Those really important ones that usually have quite protectionist wording around maintaining and protecting. So in those kind of overlays, a consent would be required. Or the other thing is large scale structures, for instance, maybe a large water reservoir that's servicing a community, that would require a consent as well. But on the whole, most of the things that are required for our day-to-day to support our communities, they're generally going to be permitted within certain parameters, like certain heights or distance from the boundary, that kind of thing. So what I've done with this chapter is organised it into sections, because what I've found is that the infrastructure providers don't want to go through, sometimes there can be 60 to 100 different rules in these chapters. They're often quite voluminous. So by doing the intersections, then the network utility operator can go straight there. So for Spark or Vodafone, they can go to, they've got the objectives and policies, which are common across all of them, but then they could go to a telecommunications section. So they can say, okay, we're going to do this particular structure. It needs to be this height. it needs to be located there, it needs a consent, whatever. So that's why I've done that, and it's done alphabetically so that you can navigate your way through.
Carolyn, excuse me, I'm just going to interrupt here. I have a question at this point, and it's for Catherine as well. It's on the slide that you're on, and it's about the overlays that you're talking to here. So is this all the overlays? Is it some of the overlays? Is it like, are we still going to have our coastal overlay? And so on and so on and so on. So which overlays are they all in, or some of them more? Yeah.
Yeah, so through you, Worship, we will have quite a list, I guess, and elected members have seen all of the topics that have come to them in terms of natural character areas. There's the coastal environment. Carolyn's mentioned the outstanding natural landscapes, and there's the features as well. And then obviously we've mentioned SNAs, which is not obviously going into the draft at this stage. And we've talked to the sites of significance to Maori, heritage buildings and items, and I'm just trying to think of the other
Historic
ones.
heritage.
Yep, historic heritage, and I feel like there's one more. Yeah, so yes, so all of those overlays will obviously be mapped areas, which if proposed infrastructure is within any of those, then yes, it would trigger consent, and as Carolyn's set out in her rules. So yeah, we'll be having some comms around that as part of our district plan engagement, just to make it really clear, because those are the areas, as Carolyn's highlighted, are the ones that oh, sorry, the other one is natural hazards as well. That's an overlay that obviously will, we don't want to be putting infrastructure into natural hazard areas. So yeah, so hopefully that provides a bit of a response there, Your Worship.
So, but
sorry.
that does, yeah, it's interesting regarding natural hazards and the flood maps and what's already there. So I guess that's where I'm headed. Ultimately, sorry, is this question about which overlays, and or is it just overlays and they're all treated the same? So
so there could be different parameters around the rule. So that's where this is the integration issue that Carolyn raised at the beginning, that she's helping to assist council with. So everybody's drafting a chapter in a bit of a silo at the moment, if that makes sense. What we've got to do is make sure that we've got some consistencies. And it's things like earthworks, it's things like setbacks, making sure that the chapters are consistent depending on what the effect is and the issue. So so you may notice when this all comes together that there is a particular reason why we might have said, you know, it needs to be 20 meters here and 30 meters here, depending on what the activity is within those overlays. And certainly for the natural hazards, that's going to be quite key as well. So yeah.
The natural hazards one, through Your Worship, is an interesting question in particular, because of course you need to be enabling, because some infrastructure needs to go in a natural hazard area or a coastal area, for instance, like a stormwater outlet, for instance. I guess if you're going to put something in there that's a regionally significant infrastructure, you know, be it a road, be it a telecommunications antenna, it needs to be robust enough that it can handle or it can maintain connectivity if there is a natural hazard event. So it's always, it's an interesting one where quite often that's where it needs to be, but it needs to be done in such a way that it can cope if there is a natural hazard event within reason.
thank you, Carolyn. That's a very, very excellently clear answer. Just the kind of answer that I was hoping for, on top of the other answers as well. Thank you. Please proceed. I don't think anyone else has a question at this point.
Next slide, please, Catherine. So this is the organisation, and as I said, I've done it alphabetically, so it just makes it a little bit easier to navigate, because it is a very technical chapter. And to be honest, most people won't go, you know, a normal landowner won't go to look there. So in terms of it is called INF, that's its prefix for infrastructure. Then we start with all infrastructure. So that does things that applies across the board to any particular infrastructure. And that's things like requiring them to meet the emissions. So there's pretty stringent criteria around that. If they were going to do minor upgrading, which is one of the things I don't want to test with you today, if they were going to do earthworks, those kind of things. So that's kind of a collecting point for standards that apply across the board. And then we go into amateur radio. Now, this is an interesting section. So the content of this was developed collaboratively with, I think they call themselves the Amateur Radio, I think, Association. So these are, we know that amateur radio, not everybody's going to do it, but the people that do are very passionate about it. And they do provide a very important service, particularly in natural disaster kind of events. Then into electricity distribution, then into liquid fuels and gas, meteorological, national grid, telecommunications and radio communications, and then water, wastewater and stormwater. So as I've said, the infrastructure chapter contains district-wide provisions relating to network utilities across your district. And the objectives and policies in part 3, which are things like your zones, the intention is that they don't apply. So in the zones, you've got things like, the rural zone, you might be putting up a house. So they're doing very different things. They don't relate to your zone at all. However, and this comes to where we were talking about before with the overlays, is your overlays sit in that part 2 section, that district wide. Those objectives and policies will apply. So where there's an objective, and this is always an interesting interface and where we need to get the integration right, is where you might say avoid inappropriate development in an outstanding natural landscape. But then in your infrastructure chapter, you may need to, that may be the most logical place for a network utility structure to be located. So I've tried to do it in such a way that there will still be a consenting pathway for that infrastructure if it's got an operation or technical reason to be there, and they've looked at all other options and determined this to be the most appropriate one, then there will still be a consenting pathway. So that's why I've gone for a discretionary activity rather than a non-complying in those overlays. Next slide, please, Catherine. So this is really these are the issues where I'd really love to get your guidance from. And so I can run through your advantages and disadvantages with each of these, but I really would like some guidance. Most of these issues that I'm bringing up, I've actually poked the rules in so that if you decide that it's something that you want to include, it's already there, you can see what it looks like. If you decide you don't want to, that's fine, I'll strip them out, it's not a big deal. But the first one is water supply for firefighting. Now, Fire and Emergency New Zealand, through all the district plans that I've been involved with, they have put in submissions, they've turned up with evidence, they're seeking the inclusion of standards for a dedicated supply of water for firefighting, basically in all those district plans. In the urban areas that are reticulated, not a problem, because generally council's water supply will meet those standards. But the one that's becoming quite interesting, and one quite interested to hear your feedback, is particularly the unserviced, the rural settlements, some of the lifestyle zones that have their own water supply. So if council were to adopt this approach, then it would require the property owner to have a water tank with the capacity to be used in such an event of a fire, unless the site has a swimming pool or a dam. Now, you might say, well, that seems relatively sensible, but then you look if you have a look at the standards, it's actually quite large. So the tank would need to be independent of the drinking water supply and only be used in the event of a fire. So as an example of the requirement in that standard, a single household without a sprinkler system would require 45,000 litres of water, and that would need to be located within 90 metres of the residential unit. So there are obviously advantages. So, where there may not be sufficient water supply, the damage may be lessened for sure. Small fires could be more easily controlled. However, the disadvantage is it may not be sufficient to completely control a fire. It's only going to give you a bit more leeway in timing. It is quite a complex process. Like the standards are not black and white. They require input from the fire service. There's obviously the costs of having an additional tank and the complexity that the idea is, although the theory and reality may be somewhat different, is that water can't be used even in drought condition. And then, of course, there's the difficulty of council enforcing the protection of that water just for firefighting. So I'm really interested to hear your views on that.
Oh, sorry, mute. Councillor Curnow, thank you.
Yes, it's probably quite a short response to this. We had a plan change number 4, a couple of years ago that went into this at great lengths, because it's not just rural for us, you know, like Mangawhai has primarily tank water. So this is a significant issue that we've been down a long road on and had hearings and all the rest of it. And I would be uncomfortable with us trying to now undo that work unless there was really important reasoning why we needed to. And I think the hearing that we had established that for our community, the FENS require, or the FENS recommendations were not strong enough to require it. So yeah, I would suggest that maybe officers might need to go and just review that decision and try and get as close to that decision as we can, because I don't think our community would want us to do anything else.
And I thank you, Councillor Curnow, for that. I completely endorse and back up what you're saying. I was around at the time when that was taking place regarding Plan Change 4, and we got the thumbs up there from Councillor Vincent as well, and Councillor Larson knows more about this than you can shake a stick at. So I would say this is best left well alone. Councillor Vincent, on mute.
Mayor, I guess it does raise the question, like the people. Good morning, Karen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you at all familiar with the operative plan?
Yes, yeah, I've been going through it.
Because I would have thought this issue would have become clear through that.
It is, but it's an opportunity really for councillors just to say whether they think it's working, and knowing that you're going to get a submission that is going to seek this anyway. It's front-footing it, and I just wanted to get a feel for what councillors' thoughts were on this issue.
Okay. Jolly good.
Thank you. I would expect that you've heard loud and clear the view of the councillors.
That's perfect. Thank you very much for that. Great.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Next slide, please.
And actually following in on that, and Catherine will be addressing it in her subdivision presentation later today, but the water tank issue, they obviously are connected, and so we'll explore that in some more detail if needed. So the second one is the undergrounding of electricity distribution lines. So what we're finding is that there's a bit of a tension here between the electricity distribution companies, who would rather have them all overhead because they're very easy to maintain, and to, if there's any issues, they can get to them quite easily. However, the urban designers prefer them underground because it obviously clutters the streetscape. And so I just really wanted to get a feel for the elected members, what their preference is. Basically, as I said, there's 3 different options available to you to enable overhead electricity distribution structures and lines in all zones, and just say, do whatever, go to the distribution companies and say, do whatever works for you. The second one is to require undergrounding in all new electricity distribution networks, given that you're fairly limited what you can do with your existing ones, but if there's any new developments, should they all be underground. And the third one is to require undergrounding only in, say, the urban zones, and accepting that it's more cost effective for the rural ones to be serviced overhead. So again, just wanted to get a feel for your thoughts on that issue.
Thank you, Councillor Curnow.
Thank you, Mayor. And I might be getting my zones and my sort of all sorts muddled up, but is a settlement zone an urban zone? And Catherine, you might want to answer that. I don't know. I'm just, yeah, because I'm leaning towards number 3, but I don't want it to just be the big towns, perhaps. Yeah.
So settlement zone, as we've discussed, is probably at the moment they're largely unserviced, but we are going to include provision if, for instance, they do have some level of infrastructure, then they can subdivide down to smaller scale. But I think by and large, you know, it's not likely that because of the location of those settlement zones, that they'll probably largely remain unserviced.
Presumably they'd have electricity though.
Oh, so yes, electricity. I'm talking about
Yeah.
in terms of expectation of services. So
I'm just talking about the undergrounding question that's in front of us here, is that if I would lean towards option 3 if that included settlements as well, so that it's not just the big towns that get the nice clear sort of view lines, but that, yeah, places like Tinapai and Pahi would also have those uninterrupted view lines. But certainly I don't think requiring it across the entire district is appropriate. Yeah. That's my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Do we have any other commentary, direction from elected members here? Okay, a quick comment from me. Yes, look, I'm leaning in the same direction as Councillor Curnow there, and I go back to where we just were in Mangawhai with the beautiful roundabout projects and desperately wanting the electricity to be put underground, and there were no provisions for us to be able to require that to happen. So it didn't happen. So the beautiful multi-million-dollar roundabouts are kind of literally blighted by efficient and effective power lines, where we actually had everything ripped up and could have easily put it all underground. So would have made it a much prettier village. But anyway, so I'm leaning towards number 3, yeah, as well.
Thank you, Your Worship and Councillors. That's really useful. Right, next one, please, Catherine. Okay, so what we're seeing here, again, and is quite timely because there's been communication with Michael about this particular issue, but the companies are seeking protection of the gas and petroleum transmission lines. Now, in terms of the national grid, the electricity transmission, they have the benefit of a national policy statement which protects them, but the gas and petroleum transmission lines don't have anything similar. The best they've got is the regional policy statement, and that's swept up in the idea of a regionally significant infrastructure. So as I've said, that they do put in submissions, they do rock up with evidence throughout the country. They're basically seeking to do 2 things. So they want to manage earthworks in close proximity, but also sensitive land uses such as residential, hospitals, you know, basically where a person is likely to be for an extended length of time. The lines are protected by designations already. And Kyle has very helpfully just done some quick metrics on how many properties might be affected if you, just for argument's sake, went 30 metres either side of the transmission pipeline for gas. You'd be looking at affecting around 44 properties. If you went 30 metres either side of your transmission petrol line, then you'd be looking at around 92 properties there. So again, just wanted to get a feel for how really you'd like to handle this issue.
Councillor Curnow, thank you.
Just a quick question before I sort of come to any view. What sort of protection are other councils doing? So you say that, yeah, submissions have been lodged with district plans across the country. So how are other councils responding to this?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. Some councils have, some independent hearings panels have said, well, actually, you've already got a designation. Why are you putting further restraints on people's private property? Others are saying, oh, well, you know, it is a regionally significant infrastructure. We really should put some extra additional protection around it. So it really is a bit of a mixed bag.
Okay, can I, if I can, just a second question. There's sort of, what sort of protection is currently in the designation? So I'm trying to understand the difference between the current protection and what the additional protections would be.
It's a good question. Normally your designations are shrink wrapped, if you like, just around the basically where the line is and maybe a little bit more. So if you did put a buffer, for want of a better word, that would be significantly larger than the current extent of the designation.
So when you say the current extent, is that like a metre either side or 2 metres or?
Kyle will probably be the best one to confirm. Who wants to jump in?
Sorry, what was the? No, that's okay. What was the request there?
What's the width of the current designation over the gas transmission line and the petroleum one?
Right. I'll just look at it. Sorry, it's loading. I've got it in front of me, but I'll just measure it.
Thank you.
They are 12 meters wide. So, but I'm not positive that for the entire length of the designation that the infrastructure pipeline itself runs down the dead center of the designation. Presumably it's relatively close.
So,
and for a portion.
So it's through you, Your Worship, it's 6 meters on either side of the transmission line.
so there's a significant difference if we went with the suggestion here, which, and I understand that you said that is just a suggestion, 30 metres. So we're basically going from 6 to 30 in terms of the restriction on what people can do. Okay.
Food for thought.
Yeah, quite a significant difference. Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, 44 properties plus 92 properties. That's still a reasonable number of properties that would be affected. Yeah. Sounds a lot. Maybe you could explain sort of the good reasons for doing that?
Yeah, certainly. I've done some advantages and disadvantages to work it through. So basically your advantages is it does protect the integrity of the lines and ensures continuous supply, which obviously is essential for economic activity. It does increase the ease of access for inspection, operation and maintenance for the network provider. Public safety is better maintained because the integrity of the lines, again, is better protected. And it does raise landowner awareness of the location of the lines because these would be mapped. So the on the district plan maps, you know, we've already got the designation and the lines mapped, but if you did decide to put a buffer on, we could map that as well. So the disadvantages of including a protective corridor is that it does reduce the value of properties in close proximity. They argue that it probably doesn't, but it does limit the uses, particularly near those lines. It may even reduce the development options, depends what the zone is, of course, and the subdivision potential. And in the case of greenfield development, it is likely to create unusable dead space on sites. And it does, to a certain extent, duplicate the role of the designation, which is why the councils that have gone away from it say, well, you've got designation, that's enough.
And in Kaipara, I know there's a gas line. I know where that is. Is there a petroleum line that goes through Kaipara?
Yes, there is.
Yes.
Kyle, I wonder if you want to show.
Yeah, I can share my screen here if you like, and I have to apologise. I have sent Carolyn the numbers around the wrong way. So that 44 and 92 properties, and I'll illustrate it here. Sorry, I'll just share my screen. The other way around, and they're nested within one another. I'll explain that. So the 44 is within the 92, so to speak. So these are all of our designations in the draft plan thus far, but this one, which runs north from Whangarei down to the Auckland border and then has a spur out to Mangataroto.
Mm.
That is the transmission pipeline for the transportation of gas.
Mhm.
It also has within it, for just the north-south corridor, the petroleum products, the Marsden to Wiri petroleum pipeline.
Okay.
So the 44 properties that are affected along this corridor here with a 30-meter corridor, a 30-meter buffer, are within the 92 that are affected because obviously it shares the north-south corridor.
Yeah.
My mistake putting those numbers around the wrong way.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, and I know there is basically a subdivision right on that line. That's sort of, yeah. Okay, thank you.
I think these are really important issues, so don't feel like you have to give me an answer today. If you'd like to think about it and give me your thoughts later on, that's totally fine.
I think
Okay,
I'm sort of, I'm feeling like the 30-meter might be a bit extensive, but maybe the 6-meter isn't quite enough. So yeah.
So I've got a question. Is it 30 meters each side of the line?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, not
So
30
60 in
meters
total.
span, but actually 30 meters each way from the line.
Correct.
So it's 60 meters wide.
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Just for the avoidance of doubt. Councillor Curnow, that may assist in your thinking there.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely leaning to 30 meters each side is quite extensive. But like I said, I also can see how 6 meters isn't quite enough, maybe. But it would be good to get some more rationale for either the 30 meters or the 6 meters or something in between. Yeah, if there was like a good, it sort of feels like we're picking a figure out of the air a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Michael Day and then Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Thank you, Your Worship. If we were to put our draft out without this 30-metre setback in, I am 100% certain that these infrastructure providers will then provide us with their feedback on why they think it's appropriate, and then we'll be able to consider that prior to notification. Just some food for thought for your team, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. But what that would not do would be tell the people who live in that area what they could be.
That's the flip side, Your Worship. Yep.
That's the flip side, is that the people who live in that affected area wouldn't necessarily know what could be being proposed for them or what could be in the wind.
That's correct.
So and I would say it's better to take everybody on the journey, because the infrastructure people will comment whatever we say, insofar as they'll say yes it's great, or no it's not enough, or at least I don't imagine they'd ever say it's too much. But do you know what I mean? That they will participate here, but the landowners may not notice if it's silent here on the number. So I would prefer that there were a number and that we had the engagement. I'm not sure it's 30 meters each side, but I'd prefer that approach, that we are actually being specific and saying it goes from the current 6 meters up to a new figure. Maybe, I don't know, 15, I don't know. So that it's 30 meter span. I don't know. Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You kind of answered one of my questions there, which was, can we just, come up with a compromise rather than that full section? But my other question is there Is there a lack of confidence with the mapping of these lines? Is that one of the reasons why they're wanting to make such a large corridor around them? Are they worried that perhaps the lines don't quite go where they think they do or something?
Through your worship, it really is just protection. So they know exactly where their lines are, but they're saying it would be helpful if they had a wider buffer that prevents any activities within that. So that it protects their lines, and it also gives them greater access for things like maintenance as well.
Right. Okay. Does seem rather large, but I don't dig up lines, so I wouldn't know, I guess. Thank you. Food for thought.
Thank you. So, elected members, we're trying to get a clear steer here for Michael and Carolyn and the team about kind of direction. Councillor Curnow.
Okay, my steer at this point in time is definitely go out with a number, because of the Mayor's point that we want to alert those communities to what's a possibility, what could possibly be coming their way. But I just wonder whether 30 each side is just too far. So if maybe we could go with 15 each side. I'd be happy with that. But we need to make really sure that the affected people are aware that this is quite different from what their current situation is.
For you, Your Worship, we will be able to provide letters to all individual landowners in that regard. So we'll definitely be able to inform them of this potential change if you decide that's in order, so that they can provide sufficient feedback for our process.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further feedback on this from elected members here? Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Sorry, I'm not pushing on my buttons fast enough. No, I just want to concur with what Councillor Curnow said. That's all, just to be clear that I'm not being silent because I have nothing to add. I just have nothing to add. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And yes, and I'm in that same space. Yeah, thank you.
Cool, thanks for the feedback, much appreciated. Should we go back to the presentation, Catherine? So the next one is the extent of minor upgrading. So in order to enable the continued operation of infrastructure, it's common for district plans to enable minor upgrading or changes to infrastructure structures as a permitted activity, but within certain parameters. And common standards include relocation within a certain distance. It is quite interesting. Most district plans, it's modest. It's like within your structures could be moved, say 5 metres. But I noticed that some of the appeals on the Waikato district plan, some of them are seeking a movement of 100 metres, which is possibly a little excessive. Things like a maximum percentage increase in height, maximum percentage increase in diameter, particularly where you've got panels, for instance, maximum increase in diameter for a pipe, and some of the other ones there. So really, I think there's two things there. The advantages is that it enables an efficient process for network utility providers, as they don't need a consent to do minor upgrading, and it would certainly give effect to the regional policy statement in terms of that efficient use of the existing structures. It also does enable clear parameters that they can move within, but the disadvantages of allowing this kind of minor upgrading is that there may be adverse effects from upgrading. And probably the biggest downside is that the standards may enable incremental creep, like 5 years this year, 5 years next year, 5 years in the year after, until it's moved to actually where they want it to go. I think there's probably a fairly low risk of that, but it's just something to be aware of. So I really just wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Elected members. Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So are we giving direction as to whether we would allow minor upgrading or not? Sorry.
I think there's a couple of things here. Yes, whether you support the ability for them to undertake minor upgrading as permitted activity. And then the second part is what's your appetite for the level of change? Are you thinking just very minor, like as I said, 5% increase, or are you thinking that to be more flexible in enabling a greater shift or upgrading, knowing that those may result in a difference to the structures? But yeah, two things really, if that makes sense.
Right. And is our operative district plan not sufficient?
It does enable some. This goes even further though, and is more prescriptive in the things, and you can see how that rule plays out. It's quite complicated, but it enables, it's got a broader, how do I describe it? It identifies more parameters like height and movement sideways and more panels and diameter and things like that. So it's really whether you want, it does enable it at the moment, but whether it's a simple enabling or something that's more complex.
Okay, I'll see what people have to say now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Curnow.
I'm more confused than I was. Yeah, I mean, we have a clear objective of being simple and enabling. And to me, this is like a breadth and depth thing. So what maybe I've got this wrong. My understanding is that what we're talking about here is increasing the breadth of different things that are enabled under the plan, but setting in perhaps more limits that constrain the depth of the change that you can do. So there's increased scope, but decreased permissibility. I don't think that's a word, but I think you know what I mean. In how much you can do. So does that make sense? Am I?
Yes, through your worship, yes, it does. I think it's just the level of complexity, and I take on board that you want something that's a district plan that's enabling and simple. So maybe this approach is a little too complex, and that's what I really wanted to get a feel from you about.
Could you maybe just describe, for those of us that are not familiar with the existing provisions, just sort of what sort of things are allowed and what sort of things are not allowed? So sure. How is this permissive and how is it not?
Yeah, not a problem at all. So the kind of, it doesn't, in your current district plan, it doesn't say upgrading, for instance. It just says the operation, maintenance, sorry, it has got upgrading, I take that back. Relocation and removal of existing network utilities, provided that the electric and magnetic field strengths do not exceed the limits. So that one's fine, we've still got that in there. The height of support structures is to a maximum of 15% of their existing height. The radio frequency fields, we've got that one already. And then it says upgrading and renewal of gas pipelines is limited to the replacement of sections of pipeline with an equivalent pipeline diameter. So it's very simple in that it just really measures height and the equivalent pipeline diameter, but it doesn't do all those other things.
Sorry, I've got a really annoying fly in here. Yeah, so I'm probably leaning towards the existing provisions, but I'm willing to take advice on why the new provisions might be better.
So through you, your worship, is there general support / consensus for minor upgrading to be a PA here? Everyone's in agreement with that? That's everyone's sweet as with that. So we
Sorry,
can,
when you say PA, what do you mean?
an activity that's permitted by the
that PA.
Sorry, your worship.
Activity. Sorry,
yeah, sorry, your worship.
Jargon there. Sorry.
So if the whole team agrees with that, we can say, yep, park that, and then we can just kind of have some debate around the specifics of what that may not look like.
Yeah. Yes, so definitely it's a permitted activity, but it's how specific, whether we need those specifics. Like, is there a problem that has arisen that we need to fix?
Through your worship, probably the biggest thing is that it only measures two things. It measures height and it measures the gas pipeline. So you'll get the question of, okay, well, that's cool. I've got a electricity distribution line. I want to add some conductors. Where does that leave me? So I think it's by broadening it, by broadening it, but being more specific in a way, it just answers that question, where does that leave me if I want to increase the voltage, if I want to do this, if I want to do that, because I've got and that's what we're seeing, this huge diversity of infrastructure. They look different. They've got different parameters, you know, for telcos versus gas distribution, for instance.
So do we have a current problem with sort of infrastructure providers going, oh my God, this is really hard to know whether we can do this or not?
Through
Yeah.
you, Worship, I just wondered if it might be helpful, Carolyn, if we have some sort of specific examples of both your network utility providers doing minor upgrade works, but also for council as well, because we don't want to get snagged by minor upgrades either. So just thinking about, so while the operative might on the face of it seem simple and enabling, which is obviously what we're striving for here, sometimes lack of clarity actually doesn't assist. So I guess where Carolyn's heading is, if we put a bit more into this, it will hopefully provide that clarity that yes, you're a permitted activity, yes, you can go out and do that. And I think thinking about the types of activities, so I was just wondering, Carolyn, if we could maybe have a few examples of the types of things from both network utility perspective and council, just to frame it a little bit better, because I think if you can have some examples, it might help elected members get their head around what we're actually trying to achieve with these permissive provisions, and not just comparing it with the operative.
Yes, of course.
That'd be great.
And I wonder if I get those examples and present them back to you later today before we wrap up for the day. So I wonder if we park this one, go on to the next one, and then I'll bring you some examples that you can consider.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Kerner. Your hand is still up. And Councillor Vincent, your hand is up. Sorry, you're on a separate screen for me.
It's because I wish to
ask
a question. So, and I did have one question originally, was what does the operative plan say, which got answered. And then a question from that is, so what has been the problem with the operative plan, which was responded to, but I believe not answered, and providing alternative scenarios as you're proposing to do this afternoon doesn't do that for me. Like, do you have any evidence upon which to base the need for like having identified a problem and this is how we're going to solve it, is what I would like to know.
Certainly, yeah, and it has been feedback from some of the network utilities providers, but I'm just wondering if I package that up and just to make that a little bit easier to come to terms with for you this afternoon.
Yeah, and through you, Your Worship, Councillor Vincent, we were hoping to have our infrastructure team guys here in the meeting with us this morning. I haven't seen them yet, so they might be coming along to the transport section, but they would also have a good idea as to whether minor upgrading has been problematic from a council perspective, and certainly we can ask them and the consents team for some guidance on that in terms of any issues that have arisen with the operative rules. But as Carolyn said, it's quite limiting in terms of direction. So I suspect there may be issues, but we can find out.
Thank you. Any further questions, elected members here, and direction? Nothing. Thank you. Right, we'll move on. Thanks, Catherine. Thank you, Carolyn.
So thank you, Your
Yes.
Worship. This is the second to last slide, you'll be happy to hear. And this was really, I just wanted to test my approach and whether you were comfortable with this. So as I've said, the regional policy statement is very strong in enabling or recognising the limitations of regionally significant infrastructure, but also the importance and the things that it provides. So because of the technical and operational constraints, infrastructure may need to be located within those overlays, as I've talked about, for instance, and an outstanding natural landscape. Unfortunately, that may be the best location for whatever reason that a regionally significant infrastructure is located. So what I've done is that I've got two things there. I haven't identified regionally significant infrastructure separately in the rules, simply because, as you saw, it almost encompasses most things anyway. So what I've done is said that infrastructure that's in one of those overlays, as we talked about, is a discretionary activity, but then recognise the constraints in the policies to give them a consenting path, so that if for whatever reason regionally significant infrastructure does need to go into one of those overlays, then at least there's a pathway for a consent to be considered. So that's why I've gone discretionary rather than non-complying. And I just really wanted to test your comfort with that approach.
Elected members. Comfort levels seem to be satisfactory there, Carolyn. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Catherine, the last slide. So as I said, these were the issues that I wanted direction from, and have been very grateful for everything you've given me. The last one, which I'll flag now, but we'll cover it in the transport because that's kind of where it bites, is the role of the environmental engineering standards. And just keep in mind, so we'll cover that later this afternoon, but does Council want the environmental engineering standards to apply to development through the district plan? So embedding it in the district plan, or is it a separate document? And as I'll point out in transport, that's the one where it's really critical. It does a little bit in terms of water, wastewater and stormwater servicing, but we'll hold that one to transport. So just put it to one side. And that's me.
All right, thank you. So I think, yes, so we've covered that as we've gone along. Yep, but we've got to the end of that. Thank you, Caro. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So at this point, we're now shifting to our renewable energy generation item, and we have Jerome Wyeth presenting this. Is that correct, Michael?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that's correct. I just saw Councillor Larson's hand up, and I was just wondering if that's
sorry, I
got to do
didn't.
with the...
Sorry, yeah, it's IT failure here. Just the way the screen's running today. Councillor Larson, kia ora, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You're just coming back to that point about the environmental engineering standards. Is that something we're going to talk about in the transportation section more, was it? I just couldn't quite understand the point that Caro was raising there.
Yes, yeah, through you, Your Worship. Yes, it absolutely is. I just wanted to flag it because it does have implications for infrastructure as well, to a lesser degree. But I would love to explore this more fully with you in transport this afternoon.
Oh, okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. So, Jerome, kia ora, and Michael leading. Yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, this topic, as we all know, is very topical, very relevant, as per your presentation last week from, I believe it was North Power and Top Energy on this subject. So I'm going to hand you over to Jerome in a second to step you through these next few slides. Jerome's principal planner at Foresight Planning and is leading this topic for us. So over to you, Jerome.
Thanks, Michael. Kia ora, everyone. Just before I get into the presentation, also noting I've got a colleague on the line as well, Joanna Lawrenson, who's been helping out with the draft provisions and has a bit of expertise in renewable energy generation, so she may be responding to some questions at the end. But yeah, so in terms of renewable energy generation, this is a bit more of a narrow topic than infrastructure, so hopefully we can get through it a little bit quicker. But in terms of what I'll be covering on the next slide, just an overview of the key sort of statutory requirements, some of the local context and opportunities for the Kaipara district, some of the issues associated with renewable energy generation that need to be managed, and then a quick overview of the draft chapter that's been provided to you in terms of the overall policy intent and the suggested rule framework. And then there's a few questions at the end around some key areas we're seeking feedback on. Just in terms of the next slide. So the key kind of higher order documents that need to be given effect to for the district plan is the MPS on renewable electricity generation. This includes a range of provisions, but essentially it's aimed at recognising the national significance of renewable energy generation and ensuring that the national and regional and local benefits are adequately provided for at the regional and district level. It also directs regional and district plans to include provisions for a range of different types of renewable energy generation in the district where applicable, so where that's relevant to the district. And, you know, solar and wind are obviously key sources of generation in the Kaipara district. You've also got the RPS, obviously, which gives effect to the MPS, and it has a number of provisions relevant to renewable energy generation, essentially seeking to ensure that the region has secure and reliable energy supply. It also identifies renewable energy generation as regionally significant infrastructure. So some of those issues that Kara has just touched on are actually just as relevant here. And then supporting the development and use of Northland's renewable energy resources and providing for community and small scale renewable energy generation. And that direction comes from the MPS that's actually providing for a range of different types and scales of renewable energy generation, which we're trying to do through this chapter. And just briefly, that the National Planning Standards requires a section on energy infrastructure and transport, and the general approach from most recent plans is to have a separate chapter for renewable energy generation. Next slide. So as Michael said, this is a very topical topic, and I understand you had a presentation from Transpower and the team about, you know, Northland becoming the first renewable energy zone, which I think is a great opportunity. And as they would have touched on, there is, you know, there's an abundant source of solar and wind generation in the district. I will note a correction on the slide here. I've sort of said that the Mardi wind farm was recently granted consent, but that decision has not been issued yet. So we'll make sure that's corrected when the slides are made public. But that's just to know some of the potential that's on the horizon. And I also understand that the consents team is sort of dealing with some large-scale solar generation applications that may be lodged soon. So huge potential. But as Transpower would have said, the actual capacity of the network to service that potential is not there currently. And that's what that renewable energy zone will help to sort of provide. And saying that, it'll be that any sort of renewable energy generation proposal will be subject to the district plan provisions. So we need to make sure that they provide an appropriate framework for that potential to be realised, I guess. Next slide, please. This is just an illustration of what you would have been presented to last week in terms of the opportunities. They've put some projections in terms of the potential, which is pretty significant. So it's how to sort of realise that potential and the way that appropriately manages adverse effects. Next slide, please. So in terms of benefits and potential adverse effects, some of the benefits and some of these are recognised in the MPS and in the RPS is around reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reduced reliance on fossil fuel generation, contributing to the security and affordable of electricity supply in the district. There can be quite significant employment benefits during the construction phase. Increased resilience and electricity independence and helping to support economic and social well-being. And obviously around supporting, you know, the national targets around renewable energy generation and climate change mitigation is quite central at the moment. There are also adverse effects that need to be managed. Obviously, these new sort of commercial scale wind farms are pretty significant in terms of the turbines you're looking at. They are now generally over 100 metres tall. And there is this inherent tension where renewable energy generation needs to be located where the resources, and often particularly for wind, that tends to be in sort of landscape values or in the coastal environment. So you have this tension with those sort of overlay areas that Caroline touched on. So it's how to best manage that. And then I guess at a more local level, you've got potential adverse effects on rural character and visual amenity, particularly when these structures are quite new to the district. So it's kind of getting that balance right. Noise can be an issue, but there's also a national standard for wind generation noise. So it's just ensuring compliance with that standard. Next slide, please. So in terms of the policy intent, obviously it needs to give effect to the draft chapter, needs to give effect to those higher order instruments in terms of what they require. But it's really around enabling the potential of renewable energy generation in the district and ensuring it can provide for the national, regional and local benefits. It's about providing for renewable energy generation at a range of scales. So we're sort of differentiated between sort of smaller scale renewable energy, community scale, and then your larger scale. And I'll talk to that in terms of the rules. And it's also around, managing the location. So generally anything that's freestanding or larger scale is provided for in the rural environment, but you certainly don't want big turbines in your urban areas. And this is also what Caroline touched on as well, around recognising those operational functional needs of renewable energy generation, that it needs to be located where the resource is, that it needs to be located close to supporting infrastructure, that it needs to be of appropriate scale to make sure it achieves what it needs to. And then it sort of gets into the other thing we're trying to achieve here is this having the right effects management framework. So when this infrastructure needs to be located in those overlays areas, how do you manage that, and what are sort of no-goes? Next slide, please. So the rule framework really has sort of three kind of categories of renewable energy generation, and the permitted sort of activity pathways are really focused around wind and solar, and that's for two reasons. One, because it's the biggest source of generation in the district, and also because the effects of that type of generation are better understood and can be more easily managed. So the category of small scale renewable energy generation has both roof mounted and freestanding rules, I guess. And those are some of the parameters there around what might be a permitted activity. A lot of those are based on current district plan provisions, so pretty comparable in that regard. So I guess I'll note, like a small scale wind turbine could be up to 20 metres in the rural environment, and a community scale wind turbine could be 30 metres as a permitted activity. But there would be sort of setbacks, making sure it's not right next to the boundary, and that's helping to manage those kind of visual and amenity effects. And then anything large scale would have a discretionary pathway, and that would be where you consider those potential effects on overlay areas, and policies are really about managing those effects in an appropriate way. Next slide, please. So this is just some shots about what it might look like. Apologies for the very Alabama looking shot on the right. But it's trying to illustrate that, these types of generation devices can support primary production in the district, and really be of value in that regard. Here's some smaller scale stuff that potentially be located on roofs, and then sort of solar generation. And it's only became in recent years that commercial scale solar is becoming more viable. So I anticipate that you'll be seeing a lot of interest in solar generation over the life of this district plan. Final slide, please. So these are just some general areas where we're seeking your direction. Are you generally, supportive of the policy intent and what we're trying to achieve here? Should it be more enabling or more tightly controlled? Where in the district should large-scale generation be enabled, and what areas should be avoided? There are some clear provisions in the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement about avoiding certain adverse effects in areas of outstanding natural character. So we need to kind of avoid those areas, and generally do support the rule framework around permitting smaller community scale renewable energy generation. questions, comments.
Thank you, Jerome. Councillor Curnow.
Largely in support of the direction that you're taking. I haven't got any sort of significant comments to make.
Thank you. Are there further comments from elected members here? Councillor Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm generally supportive of people being able to use this technology and enabling the plan, enabling them to do that. But I think that rather than trying to identify specific areas through the plan, we should let each proposal stand on its own merit and be assessed in that regard. So I don't think we need to go identifying particular areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm okay with the direction proposed.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Wilson-Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thanks, Jerome. Yeah, I'm also generally, supportive of the direction that it's heading. I think it's really, really important with the way that everything's moving into the future to be able to enable the sort of renewable energy. Yeah, and Northland being the first zone would be very exciting. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Vincent, your hand is still up. Is that a phantom hand? Yep, it's a phantom hand. All right. Thank you. Look, some comment from me, Jerome, just echoing what Councillor Wilson-Collins just said. The renewable energy zone submission proposal regarding Transpower is a very exciting opportunity for us, which happens to be coming along right now as well, at the same time, by chance rather than by design. And so it's a real opportunity. I would say that we need to, regarding our spatial planning work that's been done, just take account of the growth projections physically of the towns, particularly the two big towns of Mangawhai and Dargaville, and if you like, and saying that in the town development is that, if you like, to be seeking to avoid large scale renewable energy inside the town boundaries. I'm going to use old-fashioned language there, but adjacent nearby is one thing, but actually like saying, oh, here's this thing and the town is growing rapidly and then has to expand around a wind farm or around a solar farm, may not be best practice. Yeah, that's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I think that brings us to the end of this item regarding the renewable energy. Thank you, Jerome.
Thank you.
For your presentation with us this morning. Michael Day, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's great direction there from the team. We managed to claw some time back as well, which is doubly good. And I'll now pass you straight back to Caroline, and we'll slide straight into the transportation section. Thank you.
Sorry, me again, but I find these presentations and your feedback incredibly useful, so thank you for this. So the next one is the transport chapter, and as I've said, that's chapter, one of the 3 chapters that sit within that part 2 of your new plan. Next one, please, Catherine. As I've said, regionally significant transport infrastructure, in terms of the regional policy statement, that gets quite the focus. And so what does that include? In terms of the Appendix 3, it includes state highways, roads, as well as walking and cycling facilities that are of strategic significance as identified in the regional land transport strategy. Includes those 2 airports, obviously none of which are in Kaipara, and installations and equipment for air navigation and railway lines and associated railway facilities. So probably no surprises there for you. Next slide, please. So the general approach of the chapter, similar to the infrastructure, is to collate all the existing transport provisions into a single chapter. Because at the moment they're in both. They're in two sections, so in the transport chapter, but they're also in some of the zones as well. So the approach I've taken here, very simple, very similar to infrastructure. It's generally enabling, except where your transport infrastructure is proposed to be located in overlay, same issue that we had last time, or it's something big. It's like a national route or regional arterial road. And what I've done at the moment, and this is without your guidance yet, is continued reliance on the Kaipara District Council Engineering Standards 2011. And that is an issue that I would like to tease out with you, which I'll do in the next slide. But I've also included some new activities like vehicle charging stations, given that new technology is coming along since the plan became operative. And the other thing which is probably worth noting is also better management of development near rail level crossings. That has come about via submissions all through the country from Kiwi Rail. So that's not only like accesses near a rail crossing, but also some the buildings and sight lines and things like that. Next slide, please, Catherine. So the role of the engineering standards, and I'm hoping that our engineering team is on this call because that would be really useful. So you guys are probably all very familiar with this already. The operative district plan is a bit of a hybrid where standards and diagrams are repeated in both documents. So for some things in transport, there's complete reliance on the engineering standards, which sit outside the plan. They're a completely separate document. And then there's some diagrams which are in both documents. And so, as I've said, there's a high reliance on the engineering standards for things like road design, access and manoeuvring standards. So as I see it, you've got three main options. The first one is that you can retain reliance on your engineering standards, given, and there is a bit of complexity there because they are, 11 years old now, and they probably do need reviews. And I understand that the engineering team is looking at that already. So that is the first option, that you retain reliance on those, and the district plan cross references to that document, again uses that to do the heavy lifting. The second option is to import everything from those standards that you want to into the district plan, and option 3 is a bit of a hybrid. Now obviously there are pros and cons to each. The way I see it, for option 1, probably the biggest advantage is no duplication. So it's quite efficient. Your district plan can just refer to those engineering standards, and so they do the heavy lifting. But there are downsides to that, and that is that these engineering standards will need to be notified in advance of you notifying the district plan. That's okay. That's not necessarily a problem. The other complexity that is that if you wish to update your engineering standards, that's cool, but you would need to do a Schedule 1 plan change to change the reference in your district plan. So when you reference an external document in your district plan, you absolutely can, but it needs to be very specific. It needs to have the name, the year, and the version. And so if you're updating your standards, you will need to do a plan change as well, so that for your district plan. Option 2, to bring all those standards into your district plan. The great thing about that is that all your provisions are in one place, they're not in two. You may well have engineering standards as well, as long as they match, that would be great. The advantage there, as I said, it's all in one place. The disadvantage is that it can blow out the size of your district plan, which may not be an issue, seeing as we're all going to e-plans anyway. And then a hybrid, where some things that are important are brought into the district plan and others you're relying on your engineering standard. Catherine, do we have the engineering team on the call at all?
Unfortunately not, sorry, Carolyn.
That's a
I'm
shame.
just trying to message David, and Eros looks like they're both in calls at the moment, sorry.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame because it'd be useful to hear it from their perspective, what it's like to use this in day to day. So I think this is probably the fundamental. There's two things. This is one of the fundamental issues that would be great to have your guidance on. Catherine and Michael, do we park this and wait for Eros and David to join us at a later stage, or just carry on?
Look, I think we probably know enough at the moment in terms of where we're heading. We've given some pretty good steer to the team in terms of our preferred option, which would be to try our best to incorporate what we know are the new environmental engineering standards that Whangarei have recently adopted. And there's some work ongoing at the moment to review those to see how fit for purpose they are for kaipara. And so I guess the question then is if those standards help us with this district plan review, it could be that Carolyn's option, which one was it? Two. We need to just decide what needs to go into the district plan versus what is covered in those environmental engineering standards. But the other option is obviously to stick with the 2011 version, which is not ideal because they are quite out of date. And my understanding from talking to the consents engineers is that they aren't fit for purpose anymore. So I think if there's a chance that we can modernise and then work out what needs to go into the district plan, that was certainly our viewpoint on it. And I guess the point of difference though is that the infrastructure team would like to see them what we call decoupled from the district plan, so that they're not a document by reference anymore, and that has some legal implications in terms of how we can enforce what's in those standards. So if we do that, which is their preferred approach, so they can continually update the document, it can present some issues in terms of what's covered in our district plan versus what's not. So we're trying to head down this line of, if we can work with the new standards and adopt those before this new plan goes out and be really clear about what's not covered and what needs to go in the district plan, that's our policy recommendation, if you like. But hence why we're here today from elected members, seeing what your guys' view is on what you'd like to do, and if there's another approach that we're not seeing. Hopefully that makes sense. I probably just confused everybody.
Somewhat. Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thanks for that, Catherine. I do wonder if there is another option, possibly, if we can find a way to make it work, which would future-proof the engineering standards, which I recognise it's not just the age the current ones are now, but with anything that we choose to put in the district plan that in this next review, they will ultimately be out of date, and it would be great to be able to avoid having to go through a plan change to update them, or have the situation where we have some diagrams in the plan which require one thing and some new engineering standards which require another thing. So is it possible to say have a provision in the plan which says compliance with the council's current engineering standards will be required, and then through the consenting process actually specify by reference to whatever the current standard, the engineering standards 2023 or whatever, is being the means of achieving that compliance? Would that fly?
Possibly not, because even through the resource consent, remember there's an 8-year period for a resource consent, particularly subdivision, between a section 223 application being lodged and 224 compliance. If the standards were updated in that time, you've then got out of date conditions of consent, and you really want them to build to the new engineering standards. So whether you do it through resource consent conditions or the plan, you've got problems. And actually the better tool legally is to use by reference in the district plan, because then you're really clear this is what applies. Yes, you need to obviously do a plan change to update that if you update your standards. And that's where we've been talking about that with the engineers, which is not their preference. They'd like to just be able to update them whenever, which makes perfect sense, and we don't disagree with that. But in terms of enforceability of the plan, and the consent planners are saying the same thing, that we should have it by reference in the district plan. I've just spotted David on the call. David, are you available there just to add to the discussion here from your perspective? David's been doing quite a lot of work with the Whangarei team on the environmental engineering standards. I just wonder if it would help elected members through your worship if you wish, David could provide a little bit of context from his perspective on the matter.
Certainly.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, there's a lot of work being done at the moment about trying to amalgamate engineering standards across the region, with WDC kind of leading that charge. So I guess from the engineer's point of view, as Catherine said, it's far better for us in an ideal world to have one standard and to be able to update it when necessary. Now, whether or not we land in a place where we have one standard across the region or not, that kind of remains to be seen. But ideally, our standards, they're constantly evolving, and our understanding of them is constantly evolving. So from the infrastructure point of view and the engineer's point of view, being able to change these outside the district plan is definitely an advantage to us. Now, I understand there's some complexities around that, and I think everybody's just still trying to get their heads around the ins and outs of all of that. Does that help? Maybe I could answer some questions.
Yeah, so for instance, because we've got on our screens here a diagram for a particular crossing type, and there's probably a number of those diagrams, and you may well do a review of that part of the engineering standards, because that's a particular problem that you've identified. So you move to address that. Now, before you can adopt those, if they're in the district plan, we'd have to go through the plan change process to adopt that. And then say you find something in the stormwater or sewerage requirements that because of new technology, you need to introduce new specifications and so on. All those sort of things. Then another couple of years later, you want to make that change to the engineering standards, and then you find, okay, well, before we can implement that, we have to go through a plan change again. So that's what you're trying to avoid, isn't it, David?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so it's quite, and as Catherine's already said too, it's quite understandable that you should. So we're just trying to find the best way through without having to, because it's bloody expensive doing a plan change. And I think it's remarkable that the 2011 engineering standards have lasted so long, actually. Yeah, I would be continuing to look for a way of making it work with the engineering standards being outside of the district plan myself. I have nothing more to say.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Councillor Curnow, thank you.
Yeah, I'd probably be leaning with Councillor Vincent on this one, keeping them separate. I do have a question though. If you're updating engineering standards, you have to go through a consultation process on that, don't you? Is that right?
Yep.
Yes. So if you've fully consulted on updating your engineering standards and you've done that part, then is there like a sort of a short version of a district plan update, say this is all plan changes that all we're doing is changing the reference number on the engineering standards?
That's a really, really good question, because I'd love to think it was as simple as that, but because you're changing the document by reference with all those new standards that would apply, and I guess this is one of the reasons that we're still looking at the 2011 version, is because it has to go through that Schedule 1 process to you'd think it's just changing the date on the district plan, but it's actually the whole document, and that's what you would consult on as part of that plan change as well to get. So you have to go through that whole process, which is why it's not a great option. And I guess a lot of councils are potentially moving away from that because of that issue. But then the issue from a council perspective is always whether a developer actually chooses because it's by reference versus chooses because it's optional, if you like, it's a guidance as opposed to a by reference standard. So it gives us less tools in the toolbox to say, actually, you do need to build that road to a 20-metre width because it's in there. And if we don't have it in there by reference, it needs to be in the district plan. If that's something that we do indeed want, you know, for everybody to build to that standard. And it's the same with Carolyn's, you know, on-site parking manoeuvring is a great example. Those types of things, they're all pretty stock standard, but if you go and change any of that, then you have to either make sure it's in the district plan if you're not going to have that document by reference, if that's something you want people to build to comply to. So it's a bit complex, I know, but there are definitely pros and cons, which is one of the reasons why we thought we'd bring this to the table today.
I'm struggling with to understand the sort of subtlety. So if you, just so I can try, if you update the environmental standards or the engineering standards, sorry, then, or environmental engineering standards, then you then need to go and update the district plan.
Yep, that's correct.
But not just referring to, you know, we're now talking about 2023, we're talking about 2023, and what that means is blah, 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 blah. Okay, so it sort of becomes like a two-step process, whereas if the engineering standards are included in the district plan, then potentially it's a one-step process. Is that right? Because then you're just going straight to the district plan. Here we are, the engineering standards as included in the district plan, we're updating those. So we're only having to do one update. Is that right?
So yeah, and there's a bit of a hybrid approach to that. So Whangarei actually put quite a lot of their standards in their district plan, and then they've got their new environmental engineering standards, which are decoupled, if you like, they're divorced from the district plan document. So they've still got the tools in the toolbox in the district plan, but they've got this additional engineering standards, which David's team is still wrapping their brain around whether it's fit for purpose for Kaipara. And that will be their primary document for developers. But just remember that it's a tool as far as almost an option. Like, yes, this is how we want you to do it, but the enforceability is not the same as if it's in the district plan, is what I'm...
It's a strong recommendation rather than a requirement.
It's like, this is what we'd like you to do, but if you don't do it, we don't have any recourse. So...
Right, yeah. So... yeah, so on that basis, I think if I pick up on where the planners are leaning, option 2 is better, but I'm hearing from David that option 1, which is to keep it completely separate, is preferred. So okay, so we are having to referee this discussion.
Provide guidance.
Yeah. Not being experts on either side of the fence. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm probably leaning towards option 2. I was leaning option 1, but in terms of keeping things as simple and enforceable, which is, you know, these are principles behind what we're doing here, is enabling and simple and enabling, then option 2 is very clear. Yeah, so I guess I'm probably leaning option 2, but as I say, I don't feel like I'm an expert in this area. So yeah, over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Larson. Statement.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, for a district like Kaipara, where we've got quite, you know, broken a landscape, I think it's important that whatever method we use alternative solutions are able to be provided for, and I think being very strongly linked to sort of public roading standards doesn't give it much room to have innovative solutions in sort of private access ways and stuff. So I don't really know how that works in terms of having it incorporated by reference, or yeah, I'm a little bit unsure, like how Councillor Curnow is sort of indicating as well. What are the engineering staff actually saying that they prefer in this situation? They want it not incorporated by reference, or they do want it incorporated by reference?
So David, I'll defer to you on that one, but it's pretty much don't incorporate by reference, if I'm correct.
That's correct. Yeah,
Mhm.
we would
Okay.
like it. We would like to follow Whangarei Council's lead and basically use it as a means of compliance.
So a means of compliance, as in
So that's the one. So that's the standards that we hold up. So if a road, for example, matches that means of compliance,
yeah,
then everything goes through, no problems at all. That's not to say that somebody couldn't suggest a different shape road, turning circle, width, or something, but those things would be a harder route to gain compliance. Yep.
right. And so you would have it incorporated by reference, is that what you're saying? Or you wouldn't? You'd have it standing alone? Yeah.
Standing alone. Yes.
Okay. And I think Catherine's point was that was then harder to enforce. Is that what you were saying, Catherine?
That is correct, and that's speaking on behalf of the consents team. So the development engineers who need to obviously put conditions of consent on development, and yeah, in terms of being able to sort of point at something, if the standards are not included by reference, that can be a problem.
And I think the other complexity is there that standards need to be black or white. So for instance, if you were going to, maybe we had creation of a new road as a permitted activity, and if we then had compliance with the engineering standard, to point to that document, we would have to have it referenced. There's no way that you could just point to it without a reference.
Mm.
Hmm.
Okay. I guess we might need to just dwell on this, and it might become clear in due course. Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship. As
Michael.
we've touched on several times, timing is the key issue here. So I think everyone internally in the internal staff team accept that the 2011 KDC engineering standards are outdated. As David said, that his team is working with Whangarei District Council and others on a new suite of engineering standards right now. WDC is leading the charge in that space, and they have a new suite of engineering standards, their engineering standards 2022. So it part of a question inside this puzzle, I suppose, is if and when will KDC jump on with that engineering standards 2022, and that's a process there. And then after that, we have to say, right, will we then bring them into the plan or not? So there's two pieces of the puzzle here as well, not just one. I'm not sure if that helps or not, but it's complicated. It's complicated.
Yeah.
So Michael, so the timing on that work from WDC and when it's due to be completed, when is that?
So David probably has a response for that.
Correct.
Is David still there?
Yes, I believe their new engineering standards suite is is out for comment right now. So I'm not entirely sure it will be within the next few months. I believe that they want to finalise.
And sorry, David, we have somebody looking at it from a KDC perspective at the moment, which is due to be completed in the next month or so.
That's right.
But what that won't cover is whether there's going to be aspects of that that still, in fact, need to be included in the district plan. So we would need to still look closely if we're not going to reference that document in the district plan anymore. We need to work out which provisions might need to remain in our district plan from the current 2011 standards.
Correct, Catherine. Yep. Our people, our consultants, just basically looking at a gap analysis at the moment about whether the draft WDC standard is suitable in Kaipara. But then after that, we will need to look at, depending on how we go, incorporated into the district plan or not incorporated. We will then have to look at what rules will need to be taken into the district plan or not. So, yeah.
So, question back to Michael, considering the timing related issues of this and considering the NPS Indigenous biodiversity issue that you've got, would it be worth considering parking this aspect? Is that possible until such time as the WDC information lands, if that's the direction that the elected members are saying? But we're not, because we can't know until we get there.
Thank you, Worship. I certainly don't think we need to or should park the infrastructure chapter, the transport chapter, or anything like that, but we could park all references to engineering standards for now, noting that it is a draft and it's not a final product, noting that the engineering standards are still a work in progress as well. So that could be a good solution for the current time.
Okay, thank you. Elected members, is there any further kind of direction on that? Councillor Vincent, waving furiously, thank you.
Yeah, my hand's up, been up for a wee while. So I almost forgot what I was going to ask. The general direction I would like to take is that we see if we can find a way to make it work with the what we might call the nominal Northland District engineering standards, as a nod to the future. That they stay outside the plan and find a way to make them enforceable, perhaps more through consent conditions. And the impression I got from David was that somehow Whangarei is actually doing that. So if someone else able to do it, then maybe that's a clue. Hopefully, I'm a bit jumbled today, sorry. My brain's not working 100%, so not enough drugs. Okay, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think that adds up with what Michael's saying as well, Councillor Vincent. Yeah, about a direction.
Yeah, well, hopefully along the lines of we can put it to one side somehow. Is that what he was saying, or you were saying?
Semi, yeah, semi partly, but not very much, but a bit, yeah. to allow Whangarei to catch up to us. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Okay, I'm not sensing any allergic reactions to that direction. So let's move on, Michael, please. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think there's just one more slide or two remaining in Caroline's presentation.
And I'm aware that it's almost lunchtime. So this is the last slide. The others were just a summary of what we've already talked about. So this is a very similar issue to what we talked about with the gas transmission lines. Very similar. So what is happening is that throughout the country, Waka Kotahi, which is NZTA, and Kiwi Rail are seeking buffers around every state highway and main trunk rail line in new district plans. So what they're targeting is within 100 metres of the edge of those designations, and they're targeting both internal and external noise, which is interesting. So not only inside your house, and it's only for sensitive land uses like houses or hospitals, those kind of things, but also external, having to achieve external noise levels as well. And so that would, if they had their way, that would apply to new builds, to additions, and to alterations as well, to any sensitive land use within that 100-metre buffer. And within 40 metres, there's vibration requirements as well, needing to meet a certain vibration standard. And so I got Kyle to run the figures just to give you an idea of the scale of these things if we were to adopt the 100 metres. And that would result in 2,339 sites near the state highway. And what I thought was interesting is to see the distribution between rural and residential and business and commercial. So to give you an idea, 881 of those are rural zoned. And if we would take 100 metres near the rail, that would affect 380 sites, of which 219 are zoned rural. So what are your thoughts? Now, in terms of what other councils have been doing, very much a mixed bag. For instance, Hamilton City does have the 100 metres. A Waikato district, the independent hearings panel there turned it on its head and said no way. Whangarei, I think they are about to go to the Environment Court on this issue. So again, a very mixed bag across the councils. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Elected members. Councillor Larson, then Councillor Curnow, please. Sorry, it's the screen layout. I can't see everyone at once. Yeah.
My initial reaction would be just to leave it out and let Kiwi Rail make their submission and see how they get on. Because we want things simple, and it's going to affect a lot of properties, and it may be an unnecessary fight for us to have. It's not our fight to have. If Kiwi Rail and NZTA want it imposed, then they can use the process to have a go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Curnow.
I'd be inclined to agree. I mean, that's a huge number of properties affected, and essentially, if my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, it basically stops people in building new properties in those areas, or developing, putting on extensions, etc., to their existing properties. And I'm just thinking most of our small towns are on state highways, so that would effectively kill development in our small towns. So no, I'm keen that we do not include their request in our district plan and let them fight, and we might fight back on that, because that would have huge effects on our small towns. So yeah, that's my view.
Further statements? Councillor Wilson-Collins, big thumbs up there, leaning in. Councillor Vincent, leaning in. Yeah, look, and I'm leaning in as well. If you take the state highways out of Kaiwaka, Mangaturoto, Paparoa, and Ruawai, and Dargaville, you've taken the guts out of all those towns, frankly. And we need local storytelling and local placemaking to be occurring rather than imposed in from the outside. So yeah, so I support the approach and direction that's being provided here so far. Yeah, I think that's clear. Thank you. Next.
And that's me. So thank you, Worship and councillors.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for your presentation and the hours you've spent with us here today. And I hope it's been hope we've provided sufficient information for you to be getting on with this simple and enabling district plan that we seek. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you. Michael, back to you with
Thank you.
Paul Vanders.
Thank you, Worship. Yep, briefly, Paul will just run the team through some work we're doing on designations. Hand it over to you, Paul. Are you with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Thank
you, Worship. Councillors, a very short presentation. There's no report, and it deals with the designations. I've only got 4 slides. Just to explain to you, Catherine, that's the first slide. Right, firstly, about the designations. Now, the important aspect is that the notice of requirement, or designations as we normally know it, are spot zonings. In other words, they are standing above the provisions of the district plan. It's a spot zoning. And it allows the use of the land for the particular works which they are going to be used. And it can be different from the district plan zonings. As I say, it stands above the district plan as such, but it is shown in the district plan. Now, the designations can only be done by requiring authorities, and those requiring authorities are the ministers of the Crown, local authorities, and network utility operators like Transpower and those people. Now, there's a difference. We have to remember there's a difference between a requiring authority and a consenting authority. Now, council as consenting authority can only make recommendations on designations to the requiring authority. Now, the requiring authority can accept or change those particular recommendations, and that becomes the decision that goes into the district plan. So it is ruled by the requiring authority. Although those decisions of the requiring authority can be appealed to the Environment Court. Now, to make things a little bit difficult is that because the local authorities are also requiring authorities, we have to remember that KDC is both a requiring authority as well as a consenting authority. And it's different people, mainly the infrastructure people is the part of the requiring authority, but you as the council have to make a recommendation to yourself as a consenting authority to the requiring authority before a decision is taken. Next slide, please. So what is a designation? What can you expect in a designation? It identifies the use of the land required for a public works. And in many cases, the designations or the notice of requirement is being used to be able to use the abilities to get money in terms of the Public Works Act. So it is for a public work. It is sought for approval by the requiring authority. As I say, they come through the requiring authority to the consenting authority. And it restricts the use for the safe or efficient functioning of the operation of a specific public works or network utility infrastructure. Now, that is one of the reasons why, for instance, the gas pipeline and the petrol pipeline, they've got the 12-meter designation where they rule what can be done and what cannot be done. Outside of that designation, they don't have that particular function, and they want in this particular case, they would like the consenting authority, which is the district council, to take over some of those controls. So they cannot control anything outside of the designation. And if they allow anything within that designation, they need the requiring authority to approve that particular change or use of that that piece of land. They don't necessarily have to own that piece of land, but they run the control over it, and written approval has to be given by the requiring authority. It can be a primary and a secondary designation, and this is at this point in time an interesting debate, because the secondary requiring authority has to ask permission from the primary requiring authority. So when you have got a road over rail bridge and you want to do certain works on that bridge, then the one has to ask the other one for permission. And we haven't sorted out that with all the designations yet. The next one, it enables activities to be undertaken without resource consent, provided that it is for that particular public works, obviously. And the designation can be altered. There's a process that they have to follow to alter the designation, or it can be uplifted, or it can be deleted. And there's a process prescribed for that upliftment as well. And in the case of the Matakawi bridges and the old state highway, that is in process at this particular point in time, with a decision, you know, is Kaipara going to take over the old road? We say, no, it's not in a good state. Or is it going to stay a state highway? That is what they do when they uplift a designation. Designation can lapse. Every 5 years, you have to go through all the requiring authorities and ask them, have you given effect to that designation? Do you want to roll it over? Do you want to keep it? And if they don't say anything boo or bar, then it has got a 5-year period, unless a longer period is stated in that particular designation. The designations can be rolled over. And if they say we just want it to be rolled over, that is something that we can do. As part of this rollover, one requiring authority can take over another requiring authority's provisions. So that's part of a rollover process. There's a particular legal process that they have to follow. And previously, we did not have conditions specified in the designations. You might recall that we had to bring in the oil pipeline as well as gas pipeline, all these conditions into the district plan. Council has given approval to do those particular aspects. But we find that in many cases, and in terms of the new, that in many case planning standards, we have to incorporate those particular conditions into the district plan, or have referenced them in a particular way, so that when a consent planner gets a application in those particular areas, they know they have to go to a document or to the rules in the district plan to see what those conditions are. It creates some interesting issues to find, especially the Kaipara District Council's conditions of those particular designations. Next slide, please. Very quickly, we have at this point in time 10 requiring authorities that have designations in the Kaipara district. You see them there. It's First Gas, Kaipara District Council itself as the requiring authority, Kiwi Rail, the Minister of Courts, which used to be the Minister of Justice, has now changed its title and ownership to the Minister of Courts, the Minister of Education, all our schools, and there are some of them that they don't need anymore, the Minister of Police, 2 police stations, New Zealand Transport Agency, they have got all these state highways. North Power, mainly North Power has only got the transformer sites, not the lines. The lines are dealt with in a separate way, but those are not designated. Refining New Zealand, that's the oil petroleum pipeline. Transpower, they have got their lines, but they've got their lines in 2 ways, and that is in terms of the national environmental standards, as well as part of the designations. and then the Minister of Defence, and that's the building right next to the Dargaville office. They have sold their building, and that designation has been uplifted, but never reported into our plan as such. Last slide, please. Right, just to give you an idea, we have been going through all these designations, and we have changed the tables to comply with the new national planning standards, and the designation is going to be quite a big part of the district plan, where we had at this point in time we have only one table on one page. We now have to have them all separate with their conditions, etc. First gas, we have got one. In the case of Kaipara, we have got 19 designations, but 4 are going to be uplifted that we don't need anymore. Then the Minister of Courts, as I say, we've changed the name from the Minister of Justice. Education, they have got 22 designations, and they changed names, taking out primary schools and just leave it at school. And then one is being removed that they don't need anymore. The Minister of Police, 2, one in Dargaville and one in Ruawai, no change. NZTA, they have got 5 designations which they consolidate into 3, which deals with our state highways. North Power have 7 designations. Their conditions were all incorporated into the resource consents, and they have now asked that those conditions be incorporated into the various different designations, and it deals with the height of the towers and those type of things. Refining New Zealand has 1 with conditions, and as I said, wish to add application, or that portion refers to our previous discussion with the additions that they would like the consenting authority to have in the district plan next to their designation. Then Transpower has got 1 designation, and the Minister of Defence, as I say, that has been or will be removed because they don't require it anymore. Those are the designations, and in my report, or report that is available, I've got maps of them, etc., as well as the conditions. Last point that I would like to make, the infrastructure department, as the requiring authority, is busy looking at those 19 designations. Do we still need them? Do we want to have specialized conditions to them? And they are looking at other designations, because it has got an advantage that they don't have to apply for a resource consent every time they want to, for argument's sake, extend the Mangawhai wastewater works. If it's part of a designation, then they can do that without a resource consent, but they would be required to have a plan of works, what they're going to do it and when they're going to do it. That's all from me. Any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Elected members, are there any questions? Scanning the screen. No questions. Oh, Councillor Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been it's listening in from a prone position, so it's more comfortable that way. Paul, I was surprised to see that there were only 2 police stations designated. I guess it's in the discretion of the minister to decide which sites they want to designate and which not, because we've got Rangataroto and Mangawhai as well. Your thoughts?
Paul.
Sorry, I muted myself. No, in our discussions with the police, those were the only 2 they wanted to roll over. They have not indicated any other police station that they would like to designate. I specifically asked them the question: are they going to have something in the east as such? And as you say, it is the minister that decides if they want something. If they're only going to buy a house and use it for that particular purpose, they can do so. But for their own purpose, it would be better for them to designate it. They indicated that they did not want to designate. Thank you.
Okay.
Your worship, as part of the district plan review process, our team has formally written to all the requiring authorities, asking them, hey, look, our team's reviewing a new district plan. Do you want to roll over your current designations? Do you want more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And we have responses back from all the requiring authorities so far, which is what we'll put in the district plan, in the draft district plan, sorry. So that work has been done. That work is what you saw on the screen just before you. And as Paul said, it's at the discretion of the requiring authorities what they want in there or not.
Okay. So is there any further feedback or direction here, elected members? I think that closes this matter. Yep. All right. Okay. That's peaceful for now. Thank you. Thank you, Paul Vanders. Thank you for that. So Michael Day, back to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. One more slide prior to lunch break, and that's just quickly touching on what the team have been doing in the couple of weeks since the last briefing there in February. Team has been very busy. You can see the activity there on the screen. A couple of key points to note is that as per the direction, we've been in touch with Gordon Hoskins. He has put forward several large potikau trees in and around the Mangawhai Harbour. Our arborists are assessing those trees to see if they can get into the draft district plan by way of notable trees. Yeah, everything else is up there on the screen. Teams has taken the direction which you gave us last month and proceeding accordingly. I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Great. Thank you, elected members. Are there any questions here? No, there's no thumbs up, no hands up. Oh, Councillor Vincent.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
No.
But thank you. Michael, did you get a chance to check out that plan change that had originally been developed regarding Pahuta Kawas around the foreshore coastline at all?
Sorry.
There was a plan change.
Lost you, Councillor Vincent.
Oh, there was a plan change. Got me now?
Yes, thank you. Yep.
Okay. There was a plan change proposed and it got publicly notified with the intention of protecting the Pahuta Kawa trees, I think going along both the eastern and western shores and possibly even in the harbours as well. A blanket protection back for about 80 metres or something like that. And it was very controversial, and I just thought there might have been some lessons in that in terms of the approach to be taken. And I did mention that last time. I was just wondering if you got anywhere with checking that out, because.
So I haven't personally seen that plan change. I think speaking with Paul, he has seen that and has reviewed that. We will be taking on those lessons learnt. We are proposing to take a measured approach in this topic here, and have, as we talked about last month, we've had our arborists look at all existing notable trees in the district plan to review them to see if they are still notable, and then have sought expressions of interest from other key sort of experts in this in the tree space to see if there are other trees around that could fall into that category. And we also expect when we put our draft out that we may well have other expressions of interest coming forward as well. which will take those through the process as well.
Very much plus and minus, I imagine. Yeah, I think it's interesting too that Gordon has only proposed 3 large trees. So maybe he has taken on board the experience of last time as well. So yeah, I will just see how it goes. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So no further questions from elected members at this point. No further questions? All right. Thank you. So Michael, this brings us to the end of the session for this morning and for our open session of today's district plan review briefing. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship, and we are right on time.
Beautifully on time. Thank you. Helps when you've got half the elected members here. We landed on time, so that's great. Look, thank you to all of the consultants and professionals who provided all their expert input today. Thank you to the members of the community who've been watching here. And at this point, the broadcast of this district plan review briefing will be coming to an end. So, but the meeting will continue in a public excluded session after the lunch break. So I'll just say, ka kite anō to all the ngā tangata katoa and the people in the community. Thank you for your attendance today, and we will see you again soon. So ka kite anō.